Chapter 1. Had blowing a hole through the structure and shattering the bones in his arm been Izuku's best idea? Probably not. Was it the only one he could think of at the time to win against Bakugo without actually killing him? He thought through this as they carried him out on the stretcher, All Might telling him not to move every time he tried to sit up. Unfortunately, it had been. Though, Izuku reflected, if he had more time, he probably could have thought through a better solution, but the pressure of the explosive boy hunting him down in the building for a confrontation had limited his time to think. What's done was done, really. Izuku attempted to sit up one more time, feeling a big hand pressing against his chest when he did. All Might was hovering over him, smile more grim than usual. I'm fine, Izuku argued. My legs still work. Young Midoriya. The large figure boomed down at him, tilting his head. Please, be careful with yourself. Just rest. Recovery Girl will be angry enough as it is. Izuku winced, both from pain and the inevitable disappointment on the shriveled woman's face he was about to experience. Midoriya. He turned his head to see a familiar shock of red hair rushing up to him, jaw open wide, admiration on his face. Izuku blinked. That was unexpected. That was so manly. Kirishima pumped his fist into the air. He seemed to catch All Might's gaze and faltered. But not great that you broke your arm, I guess. Izuku suppressed a laugh. Thank you. Izuku stuttered out. He smiled back bashfully. Probably wasn't my best plan, but I guess it worked. Uraraka and Ida were running up to him now too. Even as the workers trying to pull him out on the stretcher were getting impatient, attempting to move him through the crowd of classmates. Deku, Uraraka cried. Are you okay? Midoriya-kun. That was an ingenious plan. I can say I definitely did not expect a hole through the ceiling and floor. Ida's gesturing made Izuku want to laugh. His unwavering enthusiasm was almost infectious. Unexpected as it may be, young Midoriya put himself in a very unfortunate position. All Might chimed in, and now must go to Recovery Girl to treat his injuries. His classmates looked embarrassed as the crowd parted to let him go through. Wait, I should go with him, Uraraka insisted, pink in her cheeks almost matching that of her costume. He's my partner, after all. Her brow had furrowed and Izuku was worried she felt guilty for the condition he was in. It wasn't her fault at all. The matchup of them versus Bakugo and Ida wasn't something they could control, and as soon as Bakugo was involved, all bets were off. There was nothing she could have done, really. Don't worry about me, Uraraka. Izuku protested. You should stay and watch. I don't want you to miss a learning opportunity just because I punched a hole through the building and got myself hurt. She gazed down at him, lips pursed and brow still furrowed. Are you sure, Deku? You shouldn't have to go alone. Izuku nodded back enthusiastically. I'm sure I'll just be sleeping for the rest of the time anyways. He said, healing broken bones kind of knocks me out. He laughed a little nervously. Uraraka looked hesitant, but the workers were already dragging him off. He waved at his classmates, trying to ignore Bakugo who was seething in the corner, a dark, explosive energy practically emanating from him. Don't worry about me. He would be lying if he said he wasn't affected by the chorus of well wishes that followed as he was carried off. He smiled to himself. It was still hard to believe that all these people actually liked him. He had never felt so welcome, even with his broken arm pulsating at his side, pain shooting up his shoulder occasionally. Recovery Girl was predictably upset with him when he arrived, though he tried to explain the situation and that he didn't have another way of defending himself against Bakugo. His childhood friend had been putting him through the ringer, and Izuku was certain Bakugo wouldn't have stopped until he was unconscious on the ground, likely severely injured. It didn't have the effect he thought it would, though, and he was hesitant to answer when she demanded to know which teacher's class this had been. All Might's, he squeaked out, already drifting into sleep from the wet kiss she had planted on him. That fool, she muttered, but patted him on the head. Go to sleep, dear. I'll be having words with your teacher when he gets here. Okay. He didn't want All Might to get in trouble. After all, it was Bakugo. What could really be done about that? And he was training to be a hero. He needed to learn to handle tough opponents, with quirks that didn't have any obvious weaknesses. But he was so tired he was having trouble forming a coherent response, so he drifted off to sleep, eyelids closing against his will. XXXX. Toshinori knew he was in for it when he got to Recovery Girl. He should have stopped the fight, but he could tell how badly Midoriya wanted to beat the explosive boy. It was personal for him, and he couldn't help but want to give Midoriya the chance to succeed. And Midoriya had, ultimately, with a plan Toshinori himself hadn't seen coming. Though he supposed the source of his surprise was that he would have never expected Midoriya to sacrifice his arm to win. He had a deep fondness for the boy, but sometimes the little green-haired teenager was frightening. He should have stopped it anyways, but Kugo's use of force had been excessive, downright dangerous. He was honestly shocked Midoriya wasn't burnt and battered, and that the only real injury besides some bruises was the broken arm he had inflicted on himself. Those explosions had been powerful enough to blow the building apart, certainly hot enough to scorch and blister skin. Yet Midoriya had come through it in mostly one piece. Perhaps there was some heat resistance in the fabric of his costume, though. That would probably explain it, and was smart for Midoriya to include. So he stood there, head hung in shame as Recovery Girl ripped him a new one, his student snoring softly in the bed next to them. His figure was visible through the curtain Recovery Girl had pulled around him, sleeping peacefully. Really, Toshinori, I cannot believe you. She pointed a finger at him. He didn't know how he could defend himself. Everything she said was true. He needed to teach Midoriya more control. He needed to teach him how to put his safety above his objective. He should have stopped the match sooner. He shouldn't have allowed his personal feelings for Midoriya, his desire to see him succeed, cloud his judgment. He should have been a better teacher. He fought back the feelings of pride, though, that surfaced nonetheless when he looked at Midoriya. He knew that everything had been dangerous and risky, but the green-haired boy had won. He had pulled it off. It was clever and it was ballsy, and All Might knew he shouldn't praise him for putting himself in such a position. But he would be lying if he said he wasn't impressed. I understand. I will do better, he promised. He lifted his head to see the older woman huffing at him, shaking her head. He took one last look at Midoriya, who was still knocked out, and turned to leave. Oh, where do you think you're going? He twisted back around, confused. She was sitting in her chair, arms crossed. Back to the teacher's lounge, he said, blinking. She shook her head. I've called Izawa here. There's something else we'll need to talk about. Toshinori cringed. He could only imagine the look on Izawa's face when he found out what happened. The disheveled man was terrifying when it came to his students. And Toshinori could tell that Izawa had taken somewhat of a shine to Midoriya already, if his behavior during the Quirk apprehension test said anything. But it was Toshinori's fault that Midoriya was laying in that bed right now, so if suffering Izawa's wrath was his punishment, he would accept it. I understand. I failed his student, Toshinori said, hanging his head again, voice filled with shame. Recovery Girl snorted. It's not all about you, you foolish young man. His head shot up. She started pulling up scans on her computer, one of a foot. It's about Midoriya. I noticed something odd when I healed him the first time, so I decided to take a look at his medical records. She said, gesturing to the X-ray of what was presumably Midoriya's foot. He has the extra joint, like someone quirkless would. She tapped her pen against it, as evidence. But I don't think he's quirkless. Toshinori was confused where she was going with this. I told you I passed one for all to him. His very condition is evidence of that. He responded, brow furrowed. I know that, she said dismissively, but there was something odd. And there is still a small chance that he could have a quirk, even with the extra toe joint. But he had the extra toe joint, and he never showed signs of a quirk, so the doctors never mapped his genome. There was no reason to. But I did. She pulled up another image, marks on a screen that Toshinori didn't understand. She tapped one in particular, turning back to level a serious look at him. He has a quirk factor, Toshinori. It wasn't unheard of for someone to have an extra toe joint and still have a quirk. Certainly, it was very rare, but cases of it still existed. Still, it was so rare that unless someone was showing obvious signs of a quirk counselors and doctors alike rarely expended the effort to map a genome and take a serious look at someone's quirk factor. The process was still expensive, and there were too many quirkless people that clung to the hope of a few rare cases that it was considered unreasonable to indulge their wishes. Rare, but not impossible. You think he has a hidden quirk? Toshinori said, staring at what she was presenting as irrefutable proof that Midoriya did indeed have a quirk factor. Hidden quirks were either something so subtle that there was no way to prove they ever existed, or that the circumstances required to bring them out were so rare that someone may never know. Like someone having a quirk that allowed them to regrow limbs. They may never know until there was a circumstance where they lost one. Or a quirk that gave someone good luck. It wasn't a quantitative thing. It was almost impossible to prove. And if you had good luck your entire life, you may just think you were lucky, not that it was some unseen force at play. Chio looked back at him seriously, mouth pressed into a thin line. No, I don't. What do you dash? Wait for Aizawa. She interrupted. I don't want to have to repeat myself. I just wanted to let you know, since Aizawa is not aware that one for all was bestowed on the boy by you. Are you sure we should be informing Aizawa? Toshinori asked. A variety of possibilities were running through his head, and he was having trouble figuring out what she meant. But Chio had gone deathly serious in an instant, and it was foreshadowing something he did not think he was going to like hearing. His quirk could manifest suddenly in a high-stress situation. Like any one of the exercises or practices he is involved in, Aizawa needs to know what he could be dealing with. Even though Toshinori was hesitant to inform him of anything that even got close to the truth of one for all, he couldn't argue with that logic. He supposed there was no way to definitively tell what Midoriya's true quirk could be, and any number of dangerous conditions could manifest. He was racking his brain, trying to remember what the green-haired boy had told him of his parents. It was likely that his quirk was similar to one of theirs. He could swear his student had said his mother had some kind of telekinetic ability, but could remember nothing about his father. In fact, he wasn't even sure if Midoriya had ever mentioned his father. Which, now that he thought about it, seemed very odd. Midoriya was very talkative and cheerful, and he had spoken at length about Midoriya Inko. She seemed like a sweet woman and a good mother, from the impression Midoriya gave him. But he had never said a single word about his other parent. His musings were interrupted by the door swinging open, Aizawa stepping in. He took one look at the unconscious boy on the bed, past the curtain, and then stared back at Toshinori. All might. His voice was icy. Toshinori cringed. The dark-haired man's eyes were boring holes in his head, and he could tell that the underground hero was angry. I've been informed of the situation. I should have stopped the fight, Toshinori said quickly. Aizawa raised an eyebrow back, crossing his arms over his chest. I am aware that this situation is my fault, and that it should be within my responsibilities to do what I can to dash. Toshinori, shut up. Chio interrupted. We have more important things to talk about than you being a bad teacher. Toshinori cringed again. She turned to look at Aizawa. Midoriya Izuku was diagnosed as quirkless at 5 years old, due to a lack of any visible quirk and the fact that he does in fact have an extra toe joint, she said, pulling up the scan. Aizawa did not seem affected. It is rare to have both a quirk and an extra toe joint, but not unheard of, he said with a shrug. Seems par for the course, for Midoriya. Did he simply develop late? Yes, Chio answered, face darkening as she glanced over at the sleeping figure. Very late. The answer begged a question, and Toshinori felt like he could see the gears turning in Aizawa's head. How late? He asked. A few months ago. Aizawa's head snapped to the side, to stare at Midoriya's prone form. No wonder this idiot keeps breaking his bones. He hissed. He should have said something. What do you mean? Toshinori's tongue felt heavy in his mouth. He wasn't expecting that reaction from Aizawa. Maybe for him to be shocked, but not irritated. Aizawa gestured at Midoriya. If he had told me his quirk had developed so late, I could have arranged for him to speak to a quirk counselor or to take extra classes to gain more control. So he doesn't keep breaking his bones, he said. He narrowed his eyes at Toshinori, who resisted the urge to jump back. You knew? Toshinori flung up his hands. I had suspicions, he said quickly. If he was diagnosed as quirkless, he's likely never spoken to a quirk counselor. He has no idea how to control his quirk. Everyone else has had years of guided practice and control. The unkempt man snapped back. He sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. I can't help him if I am not aware of his situation. So you will help him? Toshinori asked hopefully. Aizawa glowered back, before turning back to Recovery Girl. So he had a hidden quirk, he said flatly. She shook her head, her mouth back into that grim line. No, Aizawa blinked, and then waited for her to explain. He has internal mutations. I do believe they developed late, presumably after his initial assessment was done. But he has them. It's not a hidden quirk. Aizawa straightened instantly. You think he repressed his quirk? He said quietly. Chio nodded. Repressed quirk? Toshinori asked. He knew he was out of his depth with some of this terminology. Having been born quirkless himself, he never saw a quirk counselor either. He really had no idea how any of this worked, and he was beginning to realize that his lack of knowledge had hurt his student. He should have at least informed the school that Midoriya would not have much control over his quirk. Maybe he could have gotten him scheduled time to work with him, under the guise of their quirks being similar. It happens sometimes, Chio said carefully. Kids are both resilient and fragile. Their quirks can hurt them. Sometimes, if a child experiences something traumatic around the age that their quirks should present, they repress them to avoid harmful memories or experiences. It's a stress response. They do eventually present, usually at Midoriya's age, around adolescence, when their body starts changing more. Something traumatic. Toshinori balled his fists at his side, the power of her words hitting him. He didn't even want to look at the small teenager right then. Unable to imagine a world where little Midoriya Izuku had experienced something so traumatic at such a young age that he would repress a quirk for the next 10 years. Is there any other reason? He practically begged. Some medical conditions. I checked for all of them. He doesn't have any. Toshinori closed his eyes. When he opened them, he saw Aizawa nod sharply to himself. We will arrange for him to see a quirk counselor and a regular counselor, he said. Thank you for informing me. Chio worried her lip. We're not done yet. It was just one bomb after another, wasn't it? I don't believe his quirk has presented yet in its entirety, due to his internal mutations. And I don't think it's a passive quirk. What do you mean? Aizawa asked. What kind of internal mutations? He is highly resistant to high temperatures, both internally and externally. His costume wasn't fire-resistant at all, and yet none of the explosions he described put a burn on him. She said, and Toshinori wanted to hold his head in his hands. His respiratory system, too, is highly unusual. I cannot definitively say what it does, as it seems to have never been activated before in an atypical capacity. I doubt he knows either. What do you mean, high temperatures? Toshinori asked carefully. Recovery Girl glanced back. I mean that I think you could pour molten lava down his throat, and he would barely feel it. He could probably eat it, honestly. That is quite a mutation. Recovery Girl nodded and pulled back the curtain. Midoriya's head was tilted to the side, and 4 in his unbroken arm. The broken one had been partially healed and was still bandaged while he slept. She pushed her pen against his skin. I've also noted an unusual tensile strength in his skin. It's why only his bones break when he uses his quirk and his skin doesn't rip apart. It comes from the resistance to high temperatures. She pushed her pen against his skin again. The boy didn't even stir. It's a very interesting quirk, but I cannot be certain of what it does exactly until it manifests. And with the way UA works, that could be at essentially any time. Should we inform his mother? Toshinori wondered out loud. He was having a hard time looking at the small, freckled face in front of him, without dread building in the pit of his stomach. No, Aizawa snapped. The most common source of this kind of trauma is childhood abuse. Severe childhood abuse. If it is an ongoing situation, we risk putting him in danger until we have more information. Toshinori couldn't imagine a world in which the lovely woman his student had spoken about hurt him so badly that he would repress what was clearly a strong, complex quirk. He's right, Toshinori. Recovery Girl said. We simply have to wait until he's ready to talk and try to coax out the rest of the quirk before it manifests on accident. The school will investigate in the meantime. That doesn't mean abuse is ongoing. It could have been a singular traumatic incident when he was young, or it could have lasted for longer. There's no way for us to know right now. I will be checking police reports regarding Midoriya, Aizawa said, straightening again. There may be some information that could help us. He turned on his heel to leave, but stopped to glare at Toshinori. He felt himself shrink under the unkempt man's powerful gaze. He wasn't using his quirk, but with how small he felt, Aizawa might as well have been. In the meantime, we will be keeping a close eye on Midoriya, and I expect you to be the same. If anything, and I mean anything happens, you will inform me. Of course. His voice cracked. Aizawa stormed out. leaving Tashinori to look at the small figure in front of him. He wanted to smack himself for not having noticed anything wrong sooner. But Midoriya was always so cheerful and talkative and powerfully optimistic. He had such a strong heart that Tashinori had never imagined him being any way else. It was just another in a list of his own failures. He had to do better. XXXX. Izuku felt like Aizawa was staring at him. Sure, the underground hero was always staring at their class, cowing them into silence under his admittedly powerful gaze. No one shut them up faster than their terrifying teacher. But Izuku tried to be good and quiet during class, so he wasn't sure why Aizawa was staring at him specifically. Maybe it was the arm breaking? He had told him not to do it, and Izuku had gone and done it again, proving what Aizawa had thought of him on the first day, that if he couldn't use his quirk without hurting himself, he didn't have potential. The thought worried him, and he chewed on the end of his pencil. He would just have to work harder to control it. He had already spoken to All Might about it. The hero had told him that he was going to get time to practice controlling his quirk more, and that Aizawa knew it had only manifested recently. There had been an odd energy in Recovery Girl's office when he woke up, but he couldn't place his finger on it. He tried to ask, but Recovery Girl had simply insisted that Aizawa would follow up on his lessons from class that day and shoot him off. She had stopped to ruffle his hair affectionately, though, so he figured she wasn't that angry with him. Even though he had broken his arm in the process, he couldn't help but ride the high of success of being able to beat Bakugo so thoroughly. The look of shock on his former bully's face had been somewhat satisfying despite all he put himself through to get there, and Izuku had practically skipped back to class. He had even waved at Aizawa as he walked down the hall. Come to think of it, that was when Aizawa had started staring at him, even though it had been 2 days ago. Almost in disbelief, if Izuku had been reading his expression correctly, which he wasn't sure he was. Aizawa-sensei, is something wrong? He had asked, as he screeched to a halt in front of him, his arm still bandaged. Go to lunch, problem child. The underground hero had simply ordered, waving him off. Stop breaking your bones. He'd added. He seemed irritated, but not angry at Izuku, so he hadn't thought that much of it and had gone to lunch anyways. But maybe he was? Izuku mused, as he scribbled notes during class. That was the only explanation for him to be staring so intently at him. A ball of paper hit him in the face, and he turned to see Kirishima gesturing at him once Aizawa turned around. Izuku leaned forward, giving an apologetic smile to Shiro, who didn't seem to mind. Psst, Midoriya, Kirishima whispered. Is it just me, or is Aizawa-sensei staring at you? Izuku was instantly relieved that someone else was seeing what he was seeing. I think he's mad I broke my bones again. Izuku whispered back. He told me not to. But it was so cool. His voice got louder on the last word. I am not deaf. Aizawa snapped at the front of the room without turning around as he continued to write, and Kirishima jerked back in his chair, the legs squealing against the ground. Sorry, Aizawa-sensei. The lesson continued without interruption. Well, not without interruption. Eventually, Mineta threw one of his purple balls at the back of Bakugo's head, and the explosive boy whipped around and tried to grab Mineta by the throat. Izuku had squeaked as he dodged to the side. But when the class eventually came to an end, Aizawa dismissed them with his usual level of irritation. Midoriya, he said as they started to file out, chattering voices creating a now familiar thrum that Izuku was starting to enjoy. Uraraka had sidled up to him to chat, but his head whipped around the moment Aizawa spoke his name. A word. He waved goodbye to his friends, shuffling out of the group. There was a new Midoriya's in trouble, but Aizawa walked over and slammed the door shut behind them pointedly, leaving the two of them alone in the classroom. Izuku gulped nervously. Aizawa-sensei, have I done something wrong? He asked, shrinking in front of his teacher. The underground hero stared at him for a moment, expression unreadable, before he put a hand on his shoulder. Izuku almost jumped under the movement, surprised, but he held himself still. I'm not angry with you, Midoriya. He breathed a sigh of relief. I have been informed that you've only had your quirk for a few months. Izuku cringed. Aizawa released him, walking back to his podium to grab a piece of paper. You will be seeing a quirk counselor starting next week. He handed it to Izuku, who scanned it quickly. It looked like a schedule, with names listed on each block, and then numbers and emails for the names on the side. What? Izuku asked slowly. He didn't really think a quirk counselor could help him with one for all. It was supposed to be a secret after all. Because you need control, and that's exactly what a quirk counselor is supposed to teach you. Your classmates have had years to learn it, and it is apparent that you have not. Izuku cringed, glancing back up at Aizawa, who let out a breath. It is UA's responsibility to keep you as safe as possible. I'm trying to help you not hurt yourself every time you use your quirk. Oh, okay. He offered a small smile back. What about this? He tapped another name he didn't recognize. That's a counselor, Aizawa said. Izuku blinked. Like a therapist? He was beginning to get the sense that there was something going on behind the scenes that he wasn't privy to. Why? I don't need therapy. You've shown an unusual willingness to put yourself in danger. Aizawa responded. Izuku blinked back. I know it was a stupid decision during class, but I'm just trying to help people. His voice cracked. I couldn't leave Uraraka during the entrance exam. She could have gotten seriously hurt. I didn't know how to win against Kakin without seriously hurting him, and I didn't want to do that. He knew his voice was shaky when he spoke, but he didn't know he had done anything so wrong that they wanted to put him in counseling. Midoriya, you got seriously hurt. I just broke an arm, he said honestly. You shattered 3 out of your 4 limbs during your entrance exam, Aizawa pointed out. His voice wasn't harsh, but it was firm. Izuku winced. You are not required to go to counseling, Midoriya. This isn't a punishment. You've experienced several traumatic injuries. The fact that they have been healed does not mean they were not harmful to both your body and your mind. Many people would not be okay after experiencing what you've experienced, especially after developing your quirk so late. I don't have to go, Izuku asked hopefully. I won't get in trouble if I don't. No, Midoriya. I ask that you go to at least one session, but you will not be punished if you don't. What you and your counselor speak about will be private. If you would like to continue going after, or even at some point in the future, these services will be provided to you by the school, Aizawa said. Furthermore, if you would like to speak to me on any matter, regardless of how personal it may be, I am always here. I'll think about it, Izuku said, chewing on his lip. But I really mean it when I say I'm okay. I mean, it hurt breaking my legs, and I don't want to do it again. But I'm okay. Aizawa did not look like he believed him. Are you going to tell my mom? He wished he didn't sound like such a little kid when he said that, but he didn't want to worry his mother. He knew it was already an odd situation, him suddenly getting a quirk, and she felt so guilty already for not believing in him or supporting his dream, when it wasn't her fault at all. She couldn't have known he would receive a quirk from All Might himself. He couldn't put any more stress on her, because she would only blame herself. Aizawa's face hardened, and Izuku didn't know what he had said to cause that. No, Midoriya. His voice was surprisingly soft. Barring a life-threatening injury, your mother will not be informed of any medical or psychological treatment you wish to undergo. This matter will be handled by the school privately. She will only know what you want her to know. Oh, okay. Izuku brightened. Thank you, Aizawa-sensei. What's this last one? He asked, pointing at an empty slot on his school schedule. You and I will be meeting to work on your quirk and draw out its full potential. Izuku could have passed out. The idea was so exciting to him. One-on-one training with Eraserhead, one of his favorite childhood heroes. He couldn't believe his luck, being mentored by All Might and trained by Eraserhead all in 1 year. We don't want any last-minute surprises manifesting during class, and if things get out of hand, I can erase your quirk to prevent injury, Aizawa said. Izuku wanted to whoop in excitement. Thank you, Aizawa-sensei. He burst out. I won't let you down. Aizawa sighed. Go to lunch, Midoriya. We will start our meetings next week as well. Izuku practically skipped out the door again, on cloud 9. XXXX. Midoriya-kun. Ito waved him over, his loud voice cutting through the crowd instantly. Izuku spotted his friends and rushed over. Friends. The word already made him giddy. He couldn't believe that he had friends who thought he was cool. Friends who wanted to sit with him at lunch. As scary as that day under the bridge had been with that slime monster, Izuku didn't regret 1 second of it. Ever since he met All Might, his world had completely turned around, and he was getting to achieve one dream after another. Izuku hurried over with his food, taking a seat next to Uraraka. Is everything okay, Deku? Uraraka asked. Izuku nodded. Yeah, everything is great. He beamed. I have to meet with a quirk counselor to try and get some control on my quirk, though. Uraraka brightened. That could be a good thing, though. I would hate to see you get hurt again. She said. Didn't you say your quirk came in really late? He nodded back, green curls bouncing as he did. Yeah, so I've never actually met with a quirk counselor before. He said bashfully. Maybe it'll help. Ida looked horrified. Never had a Q-quirk counselor? He spluttered. Izuku resisted the urge to laugh at his righteous indignation. Quirks can be quite dangerous, and yours is powerfully unique. If I did not have the guidance of my own counselor and my family, I could have seriously injured myself. How did such an oversight come to be? Izuku shrugged. They thought I was quirkless for a really long time. He said, so there was no reason to see one. He rubbed the back of his neck. I guess I'm really behind you guys. Uraraka knocked her shoulder against his. You'll catch up, Deku. You're really smart and really talented. I'm sure you'll get a handle on it in no time. Did I miss anything while I was gone? He didn't mention the one-on-one sessions with Eraserhead. He didn't think his teacher wanted him broadcasting that. It felt private, the way he had pulled him aside, and Izuku didn't want to do anything that would lose his trust. Kirishima cracked a table demonstrating how hard his head was. Uraraka said, gesturing to a table wheeled up against the wall. There was big, jagged lines zigzagging from a crater-like center point, marring the surface. They had to get a new one. Izuku glanced over to see Kirishima at the table to his right, sitting with a few other students. He waved back at Izuku cheerfully, no sign of any damage done. He damaged school property. Ida said, he should not be so happy. It is disrespectful to the employees who have worked so hard. Izuku laughed anyways as he waved to the red-haired boy. He liked Kirishima. The boy was so friendly and cheerful, and Izuku couldn't help but feel like he'd been adopted by the extroverted powerhouse that was the redhead. He liked pretty much everyone in their class so far, to be honest. They chatted for a while about the field trip they had heard whispers of. Supposedly, at the end of the week, they were going to another UA facility to work on practical training. Izuku was excited, though he supposed he was going to have to work harder to not break his bones in the process. He didn't think his teachers would be too happy with him if he did. Maybe it'll be rescue missions? Uraraka suggested. That's what I'm interested in. That makes a lot of sense with your quirk. Izuku said. You'd be really good at that, Uraraka. She smiled back. Thank you, Deku. I hope we get a chance to see different types of hero careers. It's not all punching bad guys, you know. She said, beaming at him. Though I think you'd be really good at that. Izuku laughed, rubbing his neck. I'm not sure what I want to do yet. I just want to help people, really. Though I suppose he looked down at his hands. My quirk is a little bit better for punching bad guys than rescue missions. There are many applications for your quirk, Midoriya-kun. You can't know what you're capable of yet. Ida argued cheerfully. After all, you're just beginning to understand your quirk. Think of 13, Uraraka said. Their quirk would be amazing for fighting villains too, but they focus on rescue missions, and they're one of the best at it. Do you like 13? Izuku asked. Uraraka blushed, but nodded. They were one of my favorite heroes as a kid. You know, growing up out in the country, we don't get a lot of villain attacks. But there are natural disasters, and they're the kind of hero that really saves people where I'm from. She said, their kind of hero really makes a difference. I think I would be happy doing something like that. What about you, Ida? Izuku asked their other friend, who swallowed the last bite of his meal. He opened his mouth to say something, but then the bell rang. They still had time to get to class, but Ida immediately sprang to his feet. We must get back to class, he cried. I'm sure we'll make it on time, Uraraka said with a frown. I am highly punctual, Uraraka-kun, and I don't intend to stop that today. She giggled, and they got to their feet, collecting the remnants of their meal. Kirishima slid out of his own booth after them, dumping his stuff as well. He slung an arm around Izuku's shoulder as he turned to greet him. Don't look now, but Bakugo's ready to kill you. Izuku squeaked, as Kirishima grinned at him, slapping him on the shoulder. He's behind us. Just thought I'd warn you. He's still angry about losing? Izuku asked, but immediately amended his words. That was a stupid question. Kirishima laughed in response as they walked. You're a funny guy, Midoriya. What did Aizawa want to talk to you about? He asked curiously. Basically me breaking all my bones. Izuku said, avoiding direct eye contact. The redhead snickered. We're trying to avoid me doing that again. It happens to the best of us. He offered. Does it though? Izuku asked. Not really. Uraraka supplied cheerfully, jumping into the conversation. I mean, I vomit sometimes when I use my power too much. I guess everyone has a different blowback from their powers. Sometimes I get weird hardened growths. Kirishima said honestly. So I have to file them down. Uraraka wrinkled her nose, making a face. I saw you puke during the entrance exam. Kirishima protested. That was gross too. But everyone gets nauseous sometimes. Not everyone files down weird growths. She said, what about you, Ida? The teen pushed his glasses up on his nose as they walked down the hallway. My engines do occasionally overheat. He admitted. The cramping can be quite painful. But you don't file down weird growths, now do you? Uraraka poked him in the arm. The taller student nodded staunchly, but politely. I do no such thing. Ida affirmed, and Kirishima screwed up his face. I get it already. Chapter 2. Aizawa refused to tell them what their field trip was, even as they filed onto the bus for it. They were all theorizing, but he hushed them into silence as they got on, ignoring the questions aimed his way. Izuku felt a little odd, just in his gym uniform, since everyone else had their costumes, but he supposed it couldn't be helped. Plus, he wanted to make some upgrades to the costume anyways, so it was probably a good thing. He took a seat next to Azui, a girl with green hair and a frog mutation-type quirk. She seemed friendly and even complimented him on his green hair, reaching out in solidarity. He touched the curls self-consciously, as he thanked her, flushing. Is it part of your quirk? She asked, as hers clearly was. He shook his head. No. My mom has green hair too, though. You know, Ribbit, you quirk is a little like All Might's. He resisted the urge to seize up, and instead just laughed nervously. Yeah, I guess. I might ask him for some tips in controlling it. He said, if he'll speak to me. I still get nervous talking to him. That part was true. Even after being trained for 10 months by the man, Izuku still found him to be everything he thought he would be and more. Of course, he still got flustered around his hero. I think you'll be okay, Ribbit. You're a nice person, Midoriya. He flushed even redder. Azui had a straightforward way of speaking, saying exactly what she was thinking and unbothered by his blushing face. Unlike Bakugo over there. Kaminari, a blonde-haired boy with an electric-type quirk, volunteered, jerking a thumb at the boy who was sitting a few seats down. Bakugo immediately started roaring, springing to his feet and grabbing the railing. Say that to my fucking face, you electric weasel. Bakugo's got a strong quirk, but his personality is in the toilet. Azui offered honestly. I still can't believe he tried to strangle my Netta. Jiro, another girl, offered. She considered her own words for a moment. Nah, actually I can. He's so explosive, it's no wonder that's his quirk. Izuku couldn't believe what he was seeing, watching as Bakugo roared back, cursing and shouting at his classmates who just laughed, continuing to tease him. Bakugo was being teased. The idea of it was so foreign to Izuku. The taller boy had been top dog at their middle school because his quirk was so strong. Though, Izuku was realizing that when everyone had a strong quirk, that didn't mean as much anymore. He looked around the bus, his eye catching Uraraka and Ida enthusiastically conversing on one of the booth-type seats. Everyone seemed to be chatting cheerfully, except for Todoroki, who was sitting alone. Not that he had been isolated. Izuku had noticed the split-haired boy seemed to prefer it that way. He had such a cool quirk, but he was relatively aloof compared to the rest of their cheerful class. Izuku still felt a little bad, though, and resolved to try and sit next to him on the way back. Maybe he just hadn't had a lot of friends before UA, like Izuku. Though, he thought Todoroki was such a cool guy that he couldn't imagine him being as lonely as Izuku was. When they finally got to what had been referred to as USJ, they couldn't contain their gasps of excitement. They could see vastly different areas set up, clearly with different scenarios for them to play through. A shipwreck zone, an earthquake zone, and far, far more. It was huge, the sheer vastness of the facility blowing his mind. Hello, students. 13. Uraraka shrieked, as the space-suited figure appeared before them, arms up in the air. She slapped a hand over her mouth, turning bright red. Izuku bumped his shoulder against hers comfortingly. He hadn't reacted well to seeing his heroes the first time either. 13 just laughed as they stepped forward. "Welcome to USJ, Universal Studios Japan." There was a ripple of awe through the class before Aizawa's voice cut through the crowd. "Try again." "Ah, you're no fun," Eraserhead 13 said. "This is the unforeseen simulation joint. Today's focus is on rescue circumstances." They launched into a speech about the nature of their powers and the kind of scenarios they could face in their career, briefly demonstrating their abilities. They stepped a little closer. "All of you should remember that while your quirks may be very powerful and even fun to some of you, that all of you have the capacity to kill or cause serious harm. And that should never be taken lightly. A hero's job is to save lives, not to end them. Today, we are going to work on just that." They clapped their hands together. "All right, you are all going to split up into dash." A sound like a gigantic tear interrupted him, 13 whirling around to find the source of the noise. It was like static, bleeding out into the facility and buzzing loudly. It reminded Izuku of the white noise from a TV, but turned up so it was blowing the speakers out. Fuzzy and awful. Izuku spotted a dark substance gathering at the center of the facility down a series of steps. It drew together like a flat disk that seemed to void all the light around it. And then a hand reached out. Things happened so fast from there. 1 second, they were all thrilled to learn about rescue missions, to use their powers. And the next, the room was filled with villains. Aizawa was leaping forward into the fray, goggles on, moving fast and sharp. Eraserhead in action was an unbelievable sight. Izuku had been worried, because he was fighting essentially quirkless, but he was kicking serious ass. And then the warp villain was up near them, and they were screaming and trying to fight, the reality of what was happening beginning to set in. That they were under attack. That there weren't nearly enough pros for the amount of villains that had just flooded in. That there were no signals in or out of the facility, and that they were talking about killing All Might. There was fear gripping Izuku's chest, and then it was black and the panicked voices of his friends were gone. And the burning in his chest started when he was plunged underwater, but he managed not to panic, trying to swim upwards until he was saved by Azui, who pulled him aboard the ship. The burning got more intense when he realized what kind of danger they were in, especially when he realized the only quirks they could rely on were Azui and Minetus, and that none of them had the kind of firepower to take on the villains circling the ship. He could feel the panic creeping up his throat, hot and sharp, as the ship cracked in half and they started to sink and still only had the beginnings of a plan. He took a deep breath, trying to put all the worry out of his mind briefly and focus on the situation at hand. He ignored the burning. He had to come up with a plan, one that didn't involve breaking his arm. His fight with Bakugo had taught him that maybe they could get out of this arena, but once they made it past these villains, they were still in big trouble, and he couldn't help them if he was smashed to bits. His first plan could not be the one he enacted. Azui dash. "Call me Tsu." Izuku blinked, looking at the green-haired girl who had saved his life only moments before. She grinned back. "If we're going to die, you can call me Tsu." He let himself smile shyly. "Okay, Tsu." He rubbed his head. Mineta was still wailing. "I have an idea, I think. One that doesn't involve breaking your arms, ribbit." He glanced out, gripping the railing as the angle on the ship changed as it continued to sink. Not my arms. It involves breaking some fingers, but I think that's a sacrifice we can make," he said. Tsu considered it seriously and then nodded. "Okay." He explained his idea of having Tsu throw him in the air where he could release a one-for-all-powered finger flick that would spiral through the water. The veritable whirlpool would pull the villains together, giving them a chance to escape from the ship without getting demolished by the enemies surrounding them. "I think we can use Mineta's balls," he said. "If they stick things together, you can throw them into the water and it'll help bind the villains. That way, even when the whirlpool settles, they'll be stuck together." "It's a good plan," she agreed. Mineta was clutching his head next to them, trembling. "How can you be so calm?" he demanded. "We might die. If we don't stay calm and make a plan, then we'll definitely die." Izuku responded before he had time to think. "At least we might make it out." Someone is going to notice something is wrong eventually, and they don't know our quirks. We can probably take a lot of them down, he said. Sue nodded. Otherwise, they would have put me in the fire rescue arena. I would have been dried out and useless there. Sue said, they don't know what we can do. We have that advantage. Izuku couldn't help but think of Bakugo. He had almost taken down that warp villain. If they went head-to-head again, Izuku was certain that Bakugo could. As fiery and explosive as Bakugo was, he was a force of nature in a fight. The nature of his quirk made it so the longer he fought and the sweatier he got, the more dangerous he became. Even Todoroki. Izuku heard of what he did in his exercise, freezing the whole building in seconds. Even if they couldn't take on all the villains at once, he was confident that someone in his class would be able to get out of the building and get to the pros at some point. They weren't going to die here. He wasn't going to let that happen, even if he had to break every bone in his body to do it. If they could get a hole into the side of the building and get back to the center, he was certain they could send Ida to the pros. He was the fastest, and once he got there, the pros would be flooding in. Izuku was certain he could blow a hole in the side of the building. If his friends needed an opening, he would buy them the biggest one possible, even if he had to pay in blood. Hold on to me, Izuku said firmly, and let's do this. He took a deep breath, fighting the burn in his chest, steeling himself. He didn't want to break his fingers, but he would. He sent as much power as he could into them. As Tsu and Mineta climbed on, Mineta starting to pull balls off his head, crying already. And honestly, it went better than expected. Tsu flung them into the air, Mineta screaming and crying as he started to throw balls into the water. Izuku released his fingers. The flick was powerful enough to send a shockwave through the surface, burrowing a hole directly through the water. The sudden vacuum caused a whirlpool of ridiculous strength, the villains getting sucked together as they ran into sticky spheres. Izuku saw them trying to pull them off, even as the trio sailed through the air, all of them screaming. There was blood dripping down Mineta's head as he howled, throwing more and more into the water. More and more villains bound together, yelling as the force of the water pulled them. The trio went flying over them, the villains bound together in one gigantic, messy form as they struggled, unable to free themselves and getting rocked by the waves of an unnatural magnitude. When the three of them finally landed in the water, they were a safe distance away from the pull of the whirlpool, barely able to see the floating mass stuck together. They swam up to the edge, trying to duck under the surface of the water as they got closer to the villains that Aizawa was still fighting. Izuku couldn't help that his jaw dropped as Aizawa tore through them, his capture weapon flying with a deadly grace. He had known Eraserhead was a martial artist, but this was unbelievable. But it also couldn't last forever. He could see Aizawa slowing, taking more hits than he did before. He had cleared a significant portion of the villains. They were lying on the ground, either unconscious or bound in his capture weapon. But Izuku could see the ashen-haired one with hands on his face gesture towards the monstrous creature next to him. It was huge and inhuman, its brain exposed to the air and with nothing behind the eyes. There was no way that was a quirk. Izuku didn't know what that was. He heard the ashen-haired villain call it a Nomu, but that didn't mean much to him. What did was when the villain clearly ordered it to attack Aizawa. This is taking too long, the villain said. We need All Might here. Get him. The Noma charged, and Izuku's mouth opened against his will, but Tsu slapped a hand over it. He was unable to tear his eyes away as the Nomu sent its own allies flying, stomping towards Eraserhead. Aizawa seemed to instantly realize the strength the creature possessed and dodged the charge, instead of meeting the Nomu head-on. It stomped over one of its own, a sickening crack coming from the limp form, screams bitten off as it crushed internal organs and shattered bones. It lifted a bloody foot up, and when Aizawa's capture weapon slung around him, their teacher attempting to use the Nomu's momentum to send it tumbling to the ground, it grabbed the capture weapon. Aizawa went skidding across the pavement. He quickly rolled to his feet, dodging another charge from the creature. He weaved through heavily projected swings, landing hit after hit of his own, all of which seemed to have no effect. Eventually, Aizawa wasn't fast enough. The Nomu caught one arm and flung him against the ground, and Izuku cringed, knowing that must have dealt some damage. Aizawa was up in a second though, despite breathing heavily. His goggles had been torn off long ago, cracked and hanging near his neck. The Nomu grabbed one of his arms and Aizawa went to twist out of his grasp when the ashen-haired villain leaned in, placing one arm on Aizawa's elbow. Aizawa screamed. Izuku watched in horror as the skin began to decay and flake off in layer after layer, going down to the muscle. Erase her head. You're no All Might, but even I have to admit, you're pretty fucking cool, the ashen-haired villain said, tilting his head. Izuku didn't know how he saw with that hand in his face. You can call me Shigaraki. Now, where's All Might? If he doesn't get here soon, I'm going to have to kill your students. Aizawa wrenched away abruptly, twisting and sweeping one of the legs of the Nomu out from under it. He dodged as the Nomu went careening into its master, the villain shrieking as he stumbled away. Aizawa was almost away dash. And then the Nomu's hand shot out, throwing Aizawa to the ground, and Izuku heard the crack of bone and splitting skin as the Nomu ground Aizawa into the pavement. There was a wet coughing noise from their teacher as blood burst from his lips, the Nomu grabbing his head with his other hand and slamming it back down. He was going to die, Izuku thought, waves of nausea rolling through him. A little voice in his head whispered, "We're all going to die here. We have to get him out of there." He whispered, all the blood draining from his face. His chest was burning so much now, the sensation going up into his throat, and fuck, maybe he was injured and he just hadn't realized it yet. As soon as you can, grab him and get out. I can't get all of us out at once, she whispered back. He'll die if we don't, Izuku insisted. Sue let out a whimper. Oh, fuck. Shigaraki had noticed them at the water's edge, over in an instant, hand outstretched as the Nomu dragged Aizawa towards its master. They weren't far to begin with, but his hand reached towards Tsu and Izuku froze in fear. He could see, in his mind's eye, Tsu flaking away into nothing. Layer after layer of blood and skin and bone disintegrating into the air, unable to even scream as she died. And he couldn't do anything. He was just as helpless as he had always been. He thought he was going to throw up. And then Shigaraki's hand closed over Tsu's face. Nothing happened. It was Aizawa, Izuku noticed. Despite all odds, despite being smeared across the ground like a limp corpse already, he had dragged his blood-stained head up at the last second, erasing Shigaraki's quirk before he could touch Tsu. His eyes glowed red. Fuck, Shigaraki said. Erase her head, you really are cool. He laughed. Kill him. And then Izuku opened his mouth and screamed. XXXX. Shoyuta had spent some time trying to theorize what Midoriya's quirk could really do. There were mutations that should have given them a clue. But the super strength similar to that of All Might's was confusing, seemingly unrelated. He had tried to find records of his parents, both to compare quirks and to find a clue as to what a young Midoriya may have suffered. He could only find one for Midoriya Enko, who had a telekinetic quirk and a seemingly simple life. Shoyuta couldn't even find the name of Midoriya's father. One half of Midoriya's parentage was a veritable ghost with no quirk, no name, no record. It was startlingly unhelpful. Maybe Midoriya knew something, but maybe he didn't. Shoyuta had debated confronting him with the fact that Midoriya likely had a trauma-oppressed quirk, but it wasn't a bomb he wanted to drop on the boy in the middle of the school day. He had decided to tell him little by little and get him to talk to his quirk counselor and regular counselor first, people who would be far more equipped to deal with trauma of that nature. After all, Shoyuta had realized Midoriya had likely been so young it was a possibility he barely remembered what happened or didn't fully understand it. And the last thing they needed was the boy having a panic attack in an insecure environment with a powerful, complicated quirk manifesting. Though the moment those villains stepped through the warp gate, he wished he had spoken to him about it earlier. But what Shoyuta was not expecting was a white-hot burst of flame to launch itself from Midoriya's mouth. It seared straight into the Nomu's skin, making a horrible sizzling noise and the smell of burnt flesh making its way into Shuta's throat. Shigaraki yanking his arm back to avoid the blast and released Azui. The Nomu howled, releasing Shuta's head which thunked against the ground heavily. He tried to turn it, but he was so beaten and broken it was a struggle to even look up. He couldn't see well either, with blood dripping down his face and into his eyes, and he didn't trust himself not to put himself directly into the white-hot stream that would immolate him in seconds. He felt something pull him away, and the next thing he knew, he was being launched in the air. His head fell back, and through his disorientation, he could see Azui's crying face swim into view. They were on the other side of the room, having been pulled away, Mineta clutching the green-haired girl's arm. "I left him," she sobbed, and Shoyuta felt the blackness creeping onto the edge of his vision. He fought it, pulling his head up, to see Midoriya, panting, eyes wide and horrified. He was pale and shaking, in the edge of the water, and oh fuck no, he was manifesting a quirk that he had repressed for the first time in the middle of a villain attack and dash. Midoriya was going to die, Shoyuta realized. He tried to surge up, but pain laced through his body, his muscles and bones failing him. He could not move what would no longer work, thoroughly beaten and crushed by the monstrous creature that had grabbed him. Shigaraki's hand was already reaching for the trembling boy, and he forced his quirk to work, erasing Shigaraki's quirk as best he could. But there was blood dripping into his eyes, and he was already fighting to keep them open, just barely able to peek out as Shigaraki's hand grasped his face dash. And his vision went black. He was dragged into unconsciousness, fighting every step of the way. The last thing he heard was Azui sobbing so hard it sounded like it hurt, and the screams of his students. He had gotten Midoriya killed. XXXX. Izuku didn't know what was happening, but when Shigaraki grabbed his face, he knew he was in trouble. He opened his mouth to scream again, and just as the ashen-haired villain's real hand made contact with his face, he breathed out a stream of fire that was so hot it immolated Shigaraki's hand in seconds, burning straight through the villain's forearm and stopping the spread of the quirk before he could be turned to dust. Or so he thought. He felt blood drip down his face from where Shigaraki's hand had been, but he still felt something there as he reached up to touch it, shaking and horrified and mouth burning. The villain was screaming and clutching his hand, which had thunked to the ground, twisted and burned as it wetly separated from the stub remaining. It had been instantly cauterized, but the stump looked raw and mutilated. He let out a shriek that could have shattered glass as he fell to his knees, clutching it to his chest. He stared at Izuku through the side of his hair, peering under the hand still on his face. "Kill him." Izuku realized, a moment too late, that Shigaraki was talking about him. He tried to scramble out of the water, barely getting to his feet on dry land before the Nomu was rushing him. His body felt numb, and he honestly couldn't feel his limbs moving. He could only pray that they were. The creature caught him in the side, throwing him 10 feet through the air. He felt his ribs crack as he hit the ground, and he landed weirdly on one arm. There was a different kind of burning in his chest, a different one from the fire in his lungs that he didn't know he had. Like his father had had. He wanted to scream and cry into the dirt and be overwhelmed, but there wasn't time for that because the Nomu was coming. He rolled to his side, choking as he got to his feet. It stomped over, and Izuku powered up with One for All. If there were a time to use it, it was now. He swung and hit, his hand hitting the Nomu solidly. There was a rush of wind as the incredible force behind it kicked up all the dust and smoke and the smell of burnt flesh. Izuku coughed, a small amount of flame coming out as he choked on the particulate matter, taking a step back. A force like that should have sent the Nomu rocketing away, and he was expecting to feel the familiar pain of a shattered limb. But then he looked down and stared at his fist, opening and closing his hand. He was fine. Sore, but his arm wasn't broken. He'd controlled it, he realized, and Izuku could have laughed at the irony of now being the time. And he noticed way too late the Nomu swinging at him. It hit him directly in the chest, and a jet of flame shot out from his mouth involuntarily as he went flying back. It hit the Nomu directly in the shoulder, searing through flesh again, and it let out a horrible shriek. Izuku felt his head smack against the ground as he landed, like his brain was rattling around inside. He was dizzy, vision swimming, and instantly nauseous. He barely managed to tilt his head, watching the Nomu swing around wildly, trying to put out the fire. It managed to stop the spread, but it fell to its knees. The arm was hanging weirdly from the shoulder, severed by the hot flame at one point and hanging on by burnt threads. It roared and ripped its own arm off. Izuku choked back vomit at the sight. A twisted nub started to appear, spiraling out in a mass of disgusting, moving muscle. The noises were wet, squelching as it formed a new arm, and in moments, it was like the wound had never been there. Fuck. Izuku tried to get his arms under him, but he almost collapsed. One of his arms was broken, he realized. Not the one he had punched with, but the one he had landed on earlier. And he knew there was something else wrong inside, his insides feeling all smushed from where the Noma hit him. He glanced over to see where Tsu and Mineta were cowering. Tsu was clutching Aizawa to her, staring at the horrible scene in front of her. Tears were rolling down her face openly. Once the Nomu was done with him, it would be coming for them. And with Aizawa unconscious and bloodied in Tsu's arms, they didn't stand a chance. Aizawa hadn't stood a chance. He tried to stumble to his feet, spitting out blood and breathing heavily. He was still dizzy and there was blood getting in his eyes, but he had to get up. He was on the verge of collapsing when he felt strong arms wrap around him, pulling him up and lifting him off the ground. His legs dangled uselessly. The person grabbing him grunted. "You're kinda heavy, Midoriya," came the weak quip, and Izuku let out a sob, twisting to press his face against Kirishima's chest. "I got you, bro." The redhead gave him a gentle squeeze that made him cry harder. Izuku lifted his head, realizing that Todoroki and Bakugo were there too. When he first looked up, Todoroki and Bakugo looked determined. Anger splashed across his childhood friend's face openly. But when they saw Izuku, they both faltered. Izuku coughed wetly. "It heals," he choked out. His throat was burning. "It lost an arm, and it grew back. And I hit it. Not with my full force, but hard. It didn't affect it at all. I think it has some kind of shock absorption quirk." Yet We saw that. He heard Kirishima swallow. "What the fuck happened to you, Deku?" He heard Bakugo bark out, but there was a tremble in his voice. Izuku let out a laugh. He didn't know how to answer that. "The other one," Todoroki said quickly, and he stamped his right foot. I shot out, quickly encasing the monster. It went up its legs, and the Nomu started to struggle, but was having trouble getting the momentum necessary. It wouldn't hold it for long, but Todoroki was buying time. What can he do? Some kind of decaying power. He forced out. "Don't let him touch you. Your skin and muscle will flake off until you're nothing." He thought for a second. He only has one hand now, though. He grabbed my face before I got free. Is it bad?" He shook his head. "Never mind. Don't tell me now." "Did you take off his hand?" Kirishima asked, holding on to him. Izuku coughed again, momentarily struggling to breathe, and the panic was starting to set in. "I don't know what's happening." His ears were starting to ring. Crack. The Nomu broke free in an instant, and before any of them had time to react, it was charging at an inhuman speed. Kirishima let out a yell, and Todoroki stumbled back, eyes wide at the thing in front of him. Bakugo immediately let off an explosion, but the creature didn't even feel it, charging straight through the blast. Izuku ignored the screaming pain in his broken arm, yanking his hand up and pushing Kirishima's face out of the way. He closed his eyes and breathed out as a large, clenched fist swung for Todoroki's face, inches away from pulverizing the teen's skull into nothing. When Izuku opened his eyes, the creature was shrieking, stumbling back and clutching at its melting, warped hand. Todoroki quickly sent out ice spikes that shot towards the creature, breaking against its skin but holding it back. He encased it entirely in ice, letting out a shaky breath as it started to crack through already, layering it. He turned to look at Izuku with wide eyes, and he could see how much his classmate was shaking. Midoriya dash. Izuku puked. It was a mixture of blood and ash and whatever had been in his stomach that day. It dripped onto Kirishima, who made a noise, but said nothing. Izuku's lungs were on fire, and his head hurt terribly. His vision was blurry, both from the pain and the tears. The only small miracle he had was that he knew, at least to some extent, what this strange new power was and how to use it. A gift from a monster he didn't want, but something he needed. "Get him out of here," Todoroki said quickly. He hit his limit a long time ago. Kirishima hauled Izuku on his shoulder. He got ready to rush off dash. Crack. A chunk of ice went flying off of the creature, knocking them both over. Todoroki tried to shoot more back, and Bakugo let out a roar, leaping in with explosions to slow it down. Kirishima released him as they fell, but he had hardened his arms around Izuku, which had protected them somewhat. Izuku rolled over, both of them groaning, and got to his feet slowly. Midoriya, Kirishima whispered as Izuku dry heaved into the dirt. He wiped his mouth with his unbroken arm and straightened up. The only thing that slows it down is fire, he said, turning back to his classmates, who were getting sweatier by the second. Todoroki looked like someone had stabbed him when Izuku said that. I can help. It wasn't meant to be a dig at the fire that Izuku knew Todoroki had, but didn't use. He didn't know what his reasons were, and if the reason was I can't control it at all, it was probably better he didn't use it than get everyone killed. Not that Izuku had much control over the fire that was currently bursting from his lungs. But he knew enough. He had seen it used before, had seen the smoke curling out from the mouth of his father, had seen white-hot flames shoot out and terrorize his mother. He could do this. This fucking piece of shit. Bakugo screamed, letting out a concentrated blast aimed at the Nomo. The fire took off the top layer of its exposed skin, showing the scorched muscle underneath, and Todoroki tried to follow up by covering it with ice, trying to freeze the skin and prevent it from regrowing. The creature was shrieking in pain, eyes swirling around aimlessly as it writhed. Kirishima, protect Midoriya as best you can, Todoroki forced out as he concentrated on the task at hand. The redhead nodded wordlessly, hardening his arms and hovering near Izuku. Eat shit, Bakugo shrieked. Izuku stumbled forward when Todoroki's brow furrowed. What dash? His ice was flaking away and the Nomu was freeing itself. The other one is behind him. Izuku barely realized he was the one who spoke, and he opened his mouth and forced another jet of flame from his tired lungs. It felt like they were cramping, a horrible, painful sensation. But he forced it anyways, and an almost conical flame shot out, wide and long, focused more on area than heat. He heard a loud screech coming from the man behind the Nomu as he dodged to avoid the flame. He banged his stump on his knee frantically as he appeared from behind the Nomu. You're ruining everything, he screamed. Everything. Shigaraki was smeared in ash by now, some of his hands having fallen off. The one on his face was still there. He sounded so genuinely upset, like a child who had seen their sandcastle destroyed. It was so impossible to reconcile with the horror of what had occurred that Izuku spoke automatically. Sorry. Deku, don't fucking apologize to the villain, you stupid piece of shit. Izuku cringed. Sorry. Rip his fucking face off and rub his dumb fucking stump in the dirt. Bakugo shrieked, letting off an explosion that shook the ground they stood on, knocking Shigaraki backwards. Are you waiting for a fucking invitation? He let off another explosion, turning to scream obscenities at Shigaraki, who was scrambling away. Bakugo was a bad matchup for him, Izuku realized. Bakugo was a mid to long-range fighter and his attacks were light, fire, and sound, all forms of energy. When it came down to it, things that the villain could not decay. Shigaraki lurched forward to free the Nomu, who was consistently cracking the ice Todoroki was repeatedly encasing him in, almost desperately at this point. But Bakugo set off another explosion and Shigaraki fell again. It's a good thing you're fucking covered in hands because you're going to need them after I blow the rest of your shitty fucking fingers off. Izuku wanted to sink to his knees and sob. He was so grateful that Kaken was there. But he didn't, because Bakugo was there. And then you'll just be some dumb, quirkless motherfucker with no goddamn hands. The blonde blew off a chunk of ice from the Nomu, and a chunk of its shoulder to boot. Die, you freak. And then All Might arrived. XXXX. Kirishima had dragged Izuku's broken body off to the side, while Todoroki snagged Bakugo by the collar and hauled the screaming boy away as All Might took on the Nomu. It has regeneration and shock absorption. Izuku screamed to All Might, dragging his feet as Kirishima tried to pull him away. They didn't know about All Might's time limit. They didn't know he was weaker. They just thought everything was okay because he was there. But Izuku knew better. And Tsu's words on the ship haunted him. They wouldn't be here unless they had a way to kill All Might. Sure, they had all slowed down the Nomu a little bit. And maybe, if it was human, there would be a limit to its quirks. But it wasn't, and Izuku didn't think there was. He was sure that everyone else thought his apparent insanity, his struggle to stay in the fight, was because of the variety of head injuries he had seemingly accumulated. That he was undergoing a stress-related reaction because of everything. And maybe they were kind of right. After all, since the manifestation of his father's quirk, Izuku had been wanting to drag his nails down his face until he bled. But thankfully, Shigaraki had already taken care of that for him. But Izuku also knew that All Might had a limit, and if he wasn't already at it, they were approaching it. Midoriya, Kirishima grunted. You're hurt. I'm fine, he babbled, fighting Kirishima's grip. They're going to kill him. He watched the Nomu plunge its clawed fingers straight into All Might's side in the struggle, gripping him tight. The warp villain had appeared at some point, complicating the struggle even further. No matter how many hits All Might landed, it didn't seem like any of them were affecting it. Blood soaked through his mentor's shirt. Todoroki stopped in his tracks, eyeing the struggling Izuku carefully. Kirishima had frozen as well. Midoriya, your body is falling apart. We'll help him, but you have to stop. Bakugo snapped. Don't you want another crack at the warp villain, Kaken? Izuku said weakly. You bet your shitty ass I do. That was really all the provocation the blonde needed. He turned on his heel and blasted the warp villain out of the fray, the villain letting out a squeak of shock as it sailed away against its will. Todoroki joined too, freezing the Noma's arms enough that All Might could break free. The warp villain was fleeing from Bakugo as All Might went head-to-head with the Nomu again. Izuku watched intently as Kirishima tried to carry him away, even as Izuku dragged his feet. The pros will be here any minute, if All Might is here, Kirishima said. Midoriya, you've done enough. No, I haven't, he rasped. He knew the truth, and didn't that make him responsible to act on it? What was all this power for if he couldn't even use it? Shigaraki, the warp villain shrieked. Get this fucking kid away from me. The ashen-haired villain let out a scream of frustration, clutching at his hair with one hand. Like a child throwing a tantrum, Shigaraki fell to his knees once again, banging his single fist against the ground and howling about how unfair this all was. All Might and the Nomu had started punching each other, All Might hitting him with a speed that Izuku could barely follow. Holy shit, he heard Kirishima whisper, and Izuku had to agree. All Might was hitting the Nomu faster than it could regenerate, and the force of the blows had knocked everyone besides the Nomu to the ground, flattened by the wind and blowback it had created. If not for Kirishima's strong grip and hardened body, Izuku would have gone skidding away like a leaf. And when All Might launched the Nomu to space, Izuku could almost be relieved. But All Might was turned away, exhausted and frozen. The steam was already coming out from his body, one arm still outstretched. He didn't know when Shigaraki had gotten up, but he hadn't seen it, and neither had All Might. He screamed, ripping himself from Kirishima's arms and rushing forward. He heard his classmates calling his name, but he could tell how slow All Might was to move and how close Shigaraki's hand was as it emerged from the dust. It was bloody, fingers curled like he was going to claw his way through All Might's flesh. Izuku flicked his fingers, aiming at Shigaraki. The blast sent him flying back off his feet, his hand having been inches from All Might's arm. Izuku screeched to a halt, the pain in his hand beginning to get to him, his left arm hanging uselessly at his side. He had felt something break in it even worse, when he had pushed Kirishima's head out of the way to save Todoroki's life, but he had ignored it. He let out a heavy breath, and a jet of flame shot out involuntarily. His chest creaked uncomfortably. Midoriya. His name was almost a whisper, and he turned to see All Might, rooted to the spot, steam already coming from his body. He looked pale. And then a shot rang out, into the foot of the ashen-haired villain who had started to rise again. He screamed, yanking himself away, and Izuku could hear the voices of the pros at the door and the cries of relief from all the students. Shigaraki was cursing and disappearing into the warp villain before anyone could stop him. Izuku let out a sob of relief, falling to his knees. His vision was swimming, and he finally looked at his left arm. There was a jagged white bone sticking out. Oh, no wonder they had been looking at him like he was crazy. He vomited again, straight blood this time as he fell forward. Everything was pain and burning flesh, and he didn't know how he was still conscious, his head twisted towards his mentor, who was reaching a shaky hand towards him as he deflated. His skeletal form was already visible to Midoriya, eyes becoming more hollow. They were filled with concern, mouth pressed into a thin line. But he was safe. He was alive. They were all going to be okay. Despite all odds, everyone had survived. "You saved me," was the last thing Izuku heard, spoken almost in awe. Chapter 3. Shoyuta had woken up furious. A few times, Hisashi had informed him. He had tried to get out of bed and fought anyone who got in his way. They had sedated him multiple times, insisting that everything was fine and that he needed to rest. He was calmer now, no longer confused about where he was and how he got there. But his rage was burning under the surface, and he was already making lists in his head of everything he knew about the villains who had attacked. Everything about the villain that killed Midoriya, Izuku. He was bandaged like a mummy, though thankfully, his face had only suffered surface damage. His quirk was intact, and he had been informed that the damage could have been so much worse, and that he was very lucky to come out of this the way he did. Midoriya was dead, and Shoyuta was going to hunt down the villains that killed him and make them pay. He had never lost a student while they were under his care. "Shoyuta, you need to calm down," Hisashi said, uncharacteristically quiet. "I am calm." "You're planning something," Hisashi said. "I can tell. It's scary." Shoyuta clenched his fists. "They killed my student." A freckled little green-haired boy who had beamed at him earlier that day, like the sun shined out of his face. And Shoyuta could not shake how horribly he must have died, panicking from a trauma he was unequipped to handle as he was stripped down to nothing. He had saved Azui and died a hero, but he was too young to die a hero. Azui would never forgive herself. He could hear her words echoing in her head as she had sobbed. "I left him." "What?" Hisashi said. "What the hell are you talking about?" "Midoriya. Shigaraki killed him." He spat out. "I saw it." "Shoyuta, Midoriya isn't dead." Shoyuta didn't believe him. The staff kept insisting everyone was fine to get him to calm down. And there was no way everyone was fine. It was a lie to placate him. He had given those same, vague responses to victims before. "You can cut the act, Hisashi." "No, I'm serious. What did you see?" The blonde man was forcing him to look at him through the bandages, eyes filled with concern. He wasn't in his present mic getup, but a soft flannel, long hair tied into a bun. Shoyuta could tell he had been here the entire time, looking after him. He grit his teeth. "I saw Shigaraki grabbing Midoriya's head, and I passed out Hisashi. I couldn't erase his quirk. He had hold of him when..." He shook his head. "Midoriya's alive," Hisashi insisted. "Stop lying to me." He knew what Shigaraki's quirk did. His elbow was proof of that. If Shigaraki had hold of Midoriya, it would have only taken him seconds to degrade him to nothing. And there had been no one to come to Midoriya's aid. "Look," Hisashi said, leaning in. "I'm not really supposed to show it to you, but I have the video of what happened. You can see for yourself." Midoriya survived. Shoyuta watched him intently as Hisashi pulled out a tablet, clicking on it for a few seconds before he pulled up the footage from the USJ incident. He watched him fast forward to where the overhead camera was focused on the Nomu, Shigaraki's hand grasping Midoriya's face. Shoyuta felt nauseous at the sight. He didn't want to watch the green-haired boy die. They spliced together all the footage of the Nomu and Shigaraki. "Thankfully, for you, your boy is in all the important bits." He set it on Shuta's lap, angling it up so he could see and pressing play. Shoyuta watched for a second before he reached out and paused it. "What the fuck?" he said flatly. Hisashi snorted, reaching out and setting a comforting hand on Shuta's leg. "Greenbean is okay, Shoyuta. He lost a few layers of skin in some spots, but it's going to heal just fine. It looked pretty gnarly when I saw it, but it'll only scar a little on the seam of the grafts, apparently. He roasted that fucker's hand before he could get the job done." "So he's okay? He's uninjured?" Shoyuta could hardly believe that, and his suspicions were confirmed when Hisashi's face fell. "Tell me," he demanded. "Well, he broke two of his fingers getting Azui and Mineta away from some villains earlier. They bundled them up pretty nicely for us. Actually, remind me to tell you about that later. Get to the point," Shoyuta ordered. "It's better if you just watch the rest." When the video finished, Shoyuta didn't feel better. He leaned back in his bed and closed his eyes, tamping down the wave of nausea that washed over him. Give me a list of his injuries. I'm not sure this is healthy dash. Hisashi, he said sharply, and Hisashi complied. The Nomu broke his arm, and well, he made it worse, saving the Todoroki kid. Concussion, cracked ribs, and sternum. Internal bleeding. Punctured a lung on a rib too, I think. Shattered 2 more fingers. Overstressed and overused his quirk. Hisashi rubbed his neck. You've got a tough kid. He saved a lot of lives. The Todoroki kid's head would be dust without him. He saved mine. Shoyuta said quietly, and for once, Hisashi didn't say anything. Has he woken up yet? He saw the hesitation instantly. You're not helping by hiding anything. He woke up screaming and set the room on fire. Hisashi said, letting out a laugh. He was sedated, but I think he's okay now. I mean, hey, you two are peas in a pod. What about the others? Some cuts and bruises, but everyone's mostly okay. Bakugo passed out from dehydration eventually, but not before he scared the living shit out of that warp villain. Kid was screaming and kicking and almost bit Midnight until she knocked him out, and he just stayed down until they got some fluids in him. Kinda like Midoriya. Hisashi shook his head. What are you teaching them? Those two came like that. Shoyuta said dryly, letting out a huff of breath. He wanted to rub his eyes, but it was hard when he was mummified. The ones on his face would be off before long, though apparently, his nose would be crooked for the rest of his life. That was very, very low on his list of concerns, and he'd almost attacked the doctor who had solemnly told him that. You really thought he got killed? Hisashi said. I really thought I got him killed. He snapped back. It is a fucking miracle he wasn't. I don't know how, but it somehow got worse once he got away from Shigaraki. He knows about All Might. Hisashi changed the subject, which was likely a good thing, because even thinking about the level of pain his student had withstood to protect Shoyuta was making him angry. I think he knew before. There's a reason he threw himself at Shigaraki again. Shoyuta let out a sigh. Maybe not. It seems to be in his nature. Hisashi reached out and set a hand on his arm. Green Bean is a good kid, Shoyuta. You should be proud of him. XXXX. Shudo spent most of his time in class now thinking about how close he had been to dying. They had taken off a few days of school, and then Present Mike had subbed in for Aizawa for a few more. Almost everyone was in class, except for Midoriya. They had all been informed that Midoriya was okay and expected to make a full recovery, but it didn't make the empty seat in class any less glaring. Uraraka had even gotten signatures on a card and a green stuffed teddy bear for Midoriya, patiently awaiting his return to give it to him. Every time Shudo looked at the empty seat, he couldn't help but think of himself, rooted to the spot in fear, the Nomu's fist in front of his face. Unable to act. If Midoriya hadn't pushed himself, hadn't ripped apart his own body to protect him, things would be very different. He didn't know what he was going to say to the green-haired boy. Shudo wasn't the best at social interactions with people his own age to begin with, and it was going to be even worse with someone who had done so much for him so unthinkingly. He couldn't recall a time in his life when anyone protected him like that, let alone someone he barely knew. It had been almost a week, and he still didn't know what he was going to say to him when he came back. He had tried to write it down at one point, but nothing felt right, and he crumpled every draft and threw it out. The door slid open, drawing everyone's attention. Every day, he knew most of the class hoped it was going to be Midoriya, but it was just Present Mike coming in to start class. But this day, a mummified figure stepped in. His arm was in a cast, bandages up and down his body. There were some on his face. He wasn't totally wrapped up, but it was still hard to see his eyes through it. Aizawa-sensei. A chorus of voices cried. Should you even be here? Ashido wanted to know, lurching up from her chair. They were staring in disbelief as their teacher shuffled in slowly, still clearly injured. Maybe everyone at UA was crazy, Shudo thought. Aizawa shuffled up to the podium, and Shudo didn't miss the way his eyes caught on Midoriya's empty seat. Shudo didn't know the full list of Midoriya's injuries, but they had been pretty bad from what he saw, so he wasn't surprised that even Aizawa was back before him. Or, honestly, if the green-haired boy just needed some more time at home before returning to school. Shudo wouldn't be surprised if the green-haired boy was traumatized. Of all of them, he had the most reason to be. I am fine. We will continue class as usual, Aizawa said flatly. Shudo didn't know how that was going to be possible. Before we begin, I will say a few words on the USJ incident dash. The door opened again. Everyone turned to look simultaneously, as a curly tuft of green hair was instantly visible, Midoriya taking a hesitant step into the room and looking around curiously. His left arm was in a sling, he was moving a little gingerly, and there was a bandage stuck on his forehead. There was a red seam that was going through his eyebrow, disrupting the natural hair growth, but it was relatively small. Good, Shido thought. He knew what it was like to walk around with a horrific scar on his face, and he had been concerned when he first saw Midoriya at USJ. Hi, he squeaked out, giving them all a small smile. Midoriya. Too many voices to count cried at once, and people sprang from their seats. Kirishima was there first, leaping over desks to grab the smaller boy and wrap him in what must have been a bone-crushing hug. People took that as their cue to swarm the smaller boy, embracing him and patting him on the back carefully. Shido could see Midoriya hugging the redhead back with one arm tightly. Despite the major disruption, Aizawa allowed it to continue, his bandaged face impossible to read. After a few minutes, their teacher rapped his knuckles against the podium, calling them all to attention. That's enough. Stop swarming Midoriya. Students separated from him, smiling and retaking their seats. Except Uraraka, who darted to hers and then back. Wait. She was holding the card and the bear. We got something for you. She pressed it into a stunned Midoriya's arms. He looked up from her, to the gift, and then back again. We all wanted you to get better, Deku. Shido resisted the urge to squint as he tried to get a good look at the green-haired boy's bowed head. Were those tears? Oh, Deku, don't cry. She insisted, ruffling his curly hair. Midoriya wiped his eye with one hand as he lifted his teary face. It's so sweet of you guys. He sniffled. That you went to this kind of effort for me. Shido could not believe what he was seeing. The teen who he had watched face down the Nomu with no hesitation, attack Shigaraki to defend All Might, take hit after hit, with his own jagged bones sticking out of his arm, never any sign of anything but pure determination. Was crying tears of happiness after being handed a stuffed bear. He looked so innocent, button nose twitching, his little freckled face shining with tears under his mop of curly hair. A significant change from the exhausted, bloody figure that breathed fire like an ash-covered demon he had seen at USJ. He remembered the smell of burning flesh vividly. Eventually Midoriya took his seat, hugging the stuffed bear to his chest. People were still reaching out to touch his shoulder and ruffle his hair. They had all seen the broken figure carried out on a stretcher, laying there like a marionette with its strings cut. Midoriya. Aizawa's voice cut through the room, and Midoriya's head snapped up. Welcome back. Since you're all here, I have notes on several performances at USJ. What? Shido's voice burst forth before he could stop it. Several heads whipped around, and he heard someone giggle. Aizawa ignored it. Bakugo, don't bite teachers. Aizawa ordered. Also, if your quirk dehydrates you, bring a water bottle. I didn't fucking know we were going to dash comma. Aizawa interrupted the explosive boy, wheeling around to look at Shido. He almost jerked in his chair, the sudden criticisms unexpected. Todoroki, you're weak in close combat situations, and it almost ended poorly. Figure out a solution, quirk or otherwise. Shido just nodded back firmly, still shocked that they were receiving notes on a traumatic incident. Aizawa pivoted to Midoriya, pointing a hand at him. The green-haired boy blinked innocently back. Midoriya, just do less. Do less. He asked quizzically. When your bone is sticking out of your arm, you can stop. Midoriya winced in his chair. I had a concussion. He protested. I didn't know my arm was broken. No one told me. Shido blinked. We thought you knew. He was speaking before he could stop himself, and everyone whipped around to look at him. Yeah, Midoriya, you look like a straight horror show. Kirishima said cheerfully. Not the words Shido would have used, but he agreed. When they had first seen Midoriya, he was covered in ash and blood, hunched over in pain. His arm had been hanging limply at his side, an odd, twisted angle that had evoked such a feeling of wrong in Shido's gut that it made him nauseous when he'd seen it. Layers of skin had been stripped off of Midoriya's forehead so that his face was caked in blood. Blood that had been steadily dripping down his face, even as he spoke, seemingly unaware of what was happening. His green eyes glowed from the mess underneath, smoke curling from his lips. He remembered, too, the purple, broken fingers on his hand. And then he'd thrown up, and the mix of blood and soot dripped down his chin, making his mouth look like a black, bloody mess had been particularly memorable, jagged white bones sticking out of his upper arm. He shivered at the memory. A horror show? Midoriya squeaked. No calling classmates horror shows. Aizawa ordered. I promise I'm not crazy. I just had a head injury. Midoriya tried to add on, in his own defense. He waved one arm enthusiastically, the bear still tucked to his chest. It had been gently placed in his lap. That is all for the USJ incident for now. We are moving on to other matters, Aizawa said, ignoring Midoriya's protests. Shudo ignored the uproar of excitement at the announcement of the sports festival in a few weeks' time. He watched Midoriya, instead, who was still hugging the green teddy bear to his chest. At one point during class, he saw the green-haired boy look at it and start to get teary all over again, before he wiped them away and steeled himself. Maybe Midoriya was crazy, but he was also kind of cute, Shudo admitted. XXXX. Midoriya, Aizawa said, voice muffled by his bandages as they all started to file out of class. A word. Izuku had been expecting Aizawa to pull him to the side again. He waved his friends off as they tried to protest, but he insisted he was fine and skipped back to where Aizawa was standing. Yes, Aizawa-sensei? Izuku asked. He had tucked his teddy bear into his bag, so that the head was just sticking out of the top. Ashido had cooed at it on her way out. I wanted to thank you, Aizawa said, voice firm. Izuku opened his mouth to insist that wasn't necessary, but his teacher wasn't going to let that happen. Midoriya, you saved several lives at USJ, including my own. Thank you for that. Izuku rubbed his neck. I was just doing what anyone would, sensei. Izuku insisted. No, you weren't, Aizawa said, with no hesitation. That is part of what I would like to talk to you about. The dark-haired man was normally very difficult to read, but it was absolutely impossible with the bandages. I apologize for my failure to help you. I failed you in many ways at USJ, and they all could have resulted in your death. That is not something you should have ever been concerned about, and I am truly sorry. Izuku was stunned. He stared for a second, not sure what to say, before he waved his hands quickly. You don't need to apologize for anything, Aizawa-sensei dash. Midoriya. His teacher cut him off. You could have died. And furthermore, I was made aware by Recovery Girl that there was the possibility of you having aspects of your quirk that had not yet manifested. I believe you have been informed of your internal and external mutations that come from this. Izuku almost choked on his spit. He didn't understand where Aizawa was going with this. Why, yes. They had told him in the hospital how he was able to breathe fire and that there had been subtle internal and external mutations that had occurred sometime after his initial quirk assessment. The shock of learning that he had a quirk after all had left him shaking. His mother only thought it was a secondary part of One for All, but Izuku knew better. Recovery Girl informed me of this possibility before USJ. It was my intention to arrange for you to speak with a quirk counselor and a regular counselor before our own meeting to address it. I had thought that you being able to speak to professionals on this matter was the proper course of action. I was mistaken. Instead, you were in a dangerous situation when your quirk fully manifested, and it is only due to a resilience that cannot be reasonably expected from anyone that you survived. Aizawa took a deep breath. Midoriya, I have been doing this for a long time, and I am aware there are a limited amount of reasons for a quirk to be repressed and then manifest in adolescence. Izuku gulped. They had talked to him about this, at the hospital. He had stared at his hands the whole time, trying to stop them from shaking. He looked down at them now, before he felt something touch the top of his head. He peered up, to see that Aizawa had plopped his cast onto his curly tuft of hair. The action was surprisingly affectionate. You do not need to speak to me about it. I understand that whatever traumatic circumstances that surround this are personal, but if you would like to, I will listen. If it is a situation that is ongoing, I will do everything in my power to help. His voice was soft. It took Izuku a few beats to realize what Aizawa was saying. My mom isn't Dash, he breathed sharply. It wasn't my mom, sensei. I just know she worries a lot, and she feels guilty about not supporting my dream before my quirk manifested. Izuku said quickly. I just don't want to worry her. She isn't hurting me. Aizawa nodded firmly. Izuku took a deep breath. It was my father. He fidgeted. He's gone now, though. He's in prison. For hurting people. He laughed a little. I have his quirk. Hisashi had been in prison since he was little, and Izuku had put him out of his mind. He had understood the gravity of what his father was doing to his mother and him when he was young. He knew exactly what kind of danger he had been in, and he still remembered the relief when they realized he was never coming home. Even though Izuku had always wanted a quirk, deep down, he had been glad that at least he didn't have his father's. He couldn't imagine the look on his mom's face if she had seen him breathing fire in the same way that had once hurt her so badly. There really wasn't much he could do about it now. It's your quirk. Izuku's head snapped up to look at the dark-haired man, who was staring down at him seriously. It's not his quirk. It's your quirk. Izuku let out another nervous laugh. Thank you, Aizawa-sensei. You may already be aware, but the entirety of Class 1A is required to undergo a psych evaluation before participating in practical exercises. Aizawa said. Izuku nodded. Though, I'm not sure some of you would have passed before. He added dryly. But some students in particular are also being required to undergo counseling sessions as well. I'm one of them. Izuku asked, already knowing the answer. Yes. Let me remind you again, this is not a punishment. You are not the only one in class in this position. After your first counseling session, you will be allowed to participate in class activities again, provided Recovery Girl clears you. Aizawa eyed his bandaged arm. There are a certain amount of sessions you will be required to complete, as determined by your counselor. As long as you continue to go as required, you will be able to participate in class activities. Izuku nodded back. He had been thinking about taking up Aizawa's initial offer anyways. His mother had cried into his hair and begged him to talk to someone when they had been told about the reasons his quirk may have been repressed. He had done a pretty good job of compartmentalizing all the terrible things that had happened when he was little, and the fact that he never had to look at his father's face again or be reminded of him had helped. But that wasn't the case anymore. He carried a reminder with him always now. Tell me you'll go. His mother had begged and he had insisted that he was fine, that he would be okay, and his mom had cried harder, even though all the doctors had said he would make a full recovery with very minimal scarring. He had seen the red seam on the side of his forehead and had been told that it would go down to a faint, white line pretty soon. If he took good care of it, there was a chance he might not even see it in a few years. You were a victim too, Izuku, was what she had said, and he couldn't tell if she was talking about USJ or his father. I understand, Aizawa-sensei, he said. Aizawa nodded and turned to shuffle back to his podium to get his papers. I will see you after school tomorrow, Midoriya. Izuku made an odd noise. What? Our meeting, to work on your quirk. His teacher said like it was obvious. Izuku fidgeted, but asked what he was thinking anyways. Is your quirk okay, even with your injuries? Yes, Midoriya. Thanks to you. He waved a hand at Midoriya. Go, eat lunch or hang out with your friends. Whatever you children do. Oh, okay, Aizawa-sensei. He brightened and waved as he rushed out the door. Thank you. Izuku closed the classroom door behind him, already thinking about what kind of training they were going to do. Maybe they were going to test the limits of his quirk? After all, Izuku only had a little bit of an idea of what it could do, and it stood to reason that his quirk would be somewhat altered than that of his father. And besides, while he had seen it in action before, who knew the full scope of what his father had been capable of? He remembered a lot, but he had been too young to know everything. He had written something down about it at one point, but he had ripped the pages out and destroyed them when he realized his father was gone forever, which, at the time, had seemed like a good idea, but now he was wishing he had kept them. Are you muttering? Izuku whipped around, letting out a small shriek. He ignored the pain that lanced through his body when he saw Todoroki, standing by the wall, arms crossed. The split-haired boy was staring at him, one eyebrow raised in disbelief. Todoroki, he gasped. Yeah? Sorry. Todoroki shrugged. You don't need to apologize. The taller boy took a step forward. Can I help you? Izuku squawked out nervously. Todoroki was still so cool to him, even more so after seeing him fight off the Noma with him at USJ. Though, Izuku had remembered that he puked, and he cringed a little at the memory and hoped that the other boy didn't think he was a complete loser. I wanted to talk to you. We can walk to lunch, Todoroki said, gesturing with his hand. Oh, right. Izuku took a timid step forward as they started to walk. Todoroki pressed his mouth into a line first, and Izuku was trying to run through all the events of USJ in his head and figure out what the other boy wanted to talk to him about. It hit him suddenly. Wait, Todoroki-kun, I'm so sorry. What? Izuku launched directly into his explanation. He wanted to get his whole apology out there before anything could be misinterpreted, because he really hadn't meant to hurt the other boy's feelings. When I said the thing about using fire at USJ, I'm really sorry, Todoroki-kun. It wasn't meant to be a dig at you or your abilities or anything. I mean, I don't really know you or your reasons, and you could have had really good ones, and I wasn't trying to attack you for it. I just knew that I could help and I wanted to try, and that's really all I was thinking about. But I realized after that I may have hurt your feelings, and I really didn't mean to, and I see how what I said could be really mean, and that wasn't my intention at all. He stopped to suck in a breath. Midoriya. Izuku blinked at him, hoping he hadn't upset the aloof boy. He was difficult to get a read on, and Izuku was really enjoying being friends with his class. They were going to spend the next 3 years together, and he wanted to keep those good relationships. You're nuts. Was that disbelief on Todoroki's face? Izuku wasn't sure what to say to that. I wasn't offended, Todoroki said, but Izuku remembered the look on his face when he had said that. Midoriya, I'm trying to thank you for saving my life. Oh, Todoroki rubbed his forehead, sighing as they walked. Izuku felt monumentally stupid. Thank you. I would probably be dead if you hadn't helped me, and you hurt yourself badly in the process, Todoroki said solemnly. I don't know how you weren't scared. Izuku blinked. I mean, I was pretty numb. I didn't really feel a lot. He reasoned out loud. And I absolutely was scared. You didn't act like it. Todoroki didn't sound like he believed Izuku. I threw up on Kirishima. I was so scared. Izuku argued. He hadn't apologized for that yet, he realized, and resolved himself to. Todoroki shook his head. You threw up because you were in excruciating pain. Todoroki corrected him. Izuku shook his head back insistently. No, I swear. I really didn't feel a lot. I threw up because I was terrified. He thought for a second. I'm really glad Kaken was there, though. He made me less scared when he was yelling at them. I guess. Todoroki was eyeing him oddly. I just wanted to say thank you. You didn't have to help me, and you did. In fact, we should have helped you more. It's okay, Izuku said. I was being pretty difficult. He remembered Kirishima trying to drag him away on more than one occasion. He had not made it easy on his classmates. He rubbed his chin thoughtfully. If there's anything I can do, just, let me know. He looked back to the split-haired boy. He seemed entirely unsure of himself, his eyes flicking away when Izuku tried to make eye contact. Actually, Izuku said shyly, and Todoroki's head snapped back. Could I borrow some of your notes? For the classes I missed. The other boy just blinked at him. Yes, of course, he said slowly. I can give them to you at lunch. Plus, Izuku froze, stopping in his tracks. Did you hear that? Izuku said, whirling around to try and find the source. It seems someone else is looking for you too, his classmate said dryly. Todoroki had obviously spotted it and was staring as well. Izuku followed his eyes to see All Might, in his full form, crouched by one of the doorways. He was holding a little sack lunch in his hand and was waving at them. Young Midoriya. It was almost a stage whisper. Would you like to join me for lunch? Fuck yeah, Izuku wanted to join him for lunch. But he felt bad, after having essentially just made plans with Todoroki. He glanced back and Todoroki shook his head. Go. I can tell your friends you're having lunch with All Might, he said. Izuku beamed at him. Thank you, Todoroki-kun. He turned and waved back at All Might, bounding over. All Might opened the door for him to the teacher's lounge, and the moment the door was closed, pulled Izuku into a crushing hug. It is good to see you, young Midoriya. He heard the deep voice next to his ear. XXXX. Tashinori wasn't going to push for Midoriya to tell him everything. Not yet. But he was glad Midoriya told him anyway. He fought back tears of his own as Midoriya sat in front of him, wiping away his. He had laughed through them, apologizing for being such a crybaby, and even apologizing for pulling the green teddy bear that had been gifted to him out of his backpack to hold to his chest. Tashinori didn't mind. He didn't need Midoriya to prove he was strong. He knew that much already. He could have all the comfort he wanted, especially as he was spilling secrets about a dark family past that Tashinori could have never imagined. Midoriya was always so sunny, so cheerful, so helpful and determined. It was horrible to imagine the truth of what this small boy in front of him had already lived through, and that if Tashinori thought he was small now, how small he must have been back then. Sorry, I've cried a lot today, Midoriya hiccuped. Have your classmates been giving you a hard time? Tashinori asked, surprised. His brow furrowed, and he reached a skeletal hand towards the boy. Midoriya shook his head and looked down at the stuffed animal in his arm. No, they got me this bear, and he dissolved into tears again. Tashinori realized. These were happy tears. He couldn't fight the smile that came to his face. Chapter 4. We're trying for heat, first. Aizawa informed him. They were in a large training room, and Aizawa had set up a series of targets. He was still mummified, but he had insisted that the bandages were coming off soon and that he was fine to use his quirk. Izuku didn't argue with him, though he wanted to. It's fine if you destroy the target. We have others, he said, and he was holding a small device like he had for the quirk apprehension test. So should I start from a base level and then just increase it? Izuku asked quizzically. He had some free time during practical exercises and in between catching up for class. He had spent those trying to analyze his own quirk. Can you increase heat once you're already breathing fire? Or do you need to close your mouth in between? Aizawa asked. Izuku rubbed his forehead. I'm not sure. He had thought the same thing himself, and he thought he could increase heat as he went, but there was only one way to be sure. Try it. Don't push yourself too hard. We just want to see if you can do it. They learned pretty quickly that yes, Izuku could do it, but it took some time. And the whole fact that he was breathing fire meant he was essentially limited by how long he could go in between inhales. Aizawa had instructed him to work on cardiovascular endurance when he was healed. He'd recommended running or swimming or just practicing holding his breath. The longer Izuku could hold his breath for, the longer he would be able to exhale fire. As for how hot the flame could get, Aizawa had put on his goggles for that, stepping away as Izuku went for short, hot bursts of increasing heat. Stop. Izuku paused, panting as he turned to look at his teacher. I can keep going, he insisted. You're sweating. Drink water and take a 5-minute break. He wanted to argue, but seeing Eraserhead himself turn to him, bandaged like a mummy, goggles on over them, and clearly glowering even though Izuku couldn't see his eyes sufficiently frightened him into taking that 5-minute break. I can expand distance and width pretty far, Izuku said as he sat on the ground, taking slow sips from his water bottle. I did it at USJ, probably about 10 feet of flame, kind of like a cone shape. Can you go further? Izuku scratched his head. I think so. I was pretty tired by the time I did it, so I think I could definitely go further. I never saw my father go further than maybe 15 feet, though. That may be your upper limit for now, but it can likely be expanded, Aizawa said, taking a seat next to him on the ground. Your quirk is like a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it will get. Izuku considered his words, but Aizawa seemed to notice him deep in thought. This is not a pass to get yourself hurt, he hissed. I wasn't going to push myself that hard, Izuku protested. You're a bad liar, Midoriya. Aizawa rubbed his forehead. It is not a bad idea to play some cards close to your chest, Midoriya. What do you mean? I mean that for now, you may not have much of a choice since you still can't wield the other half of your quirk without hurting yourself. Izuku winced at Aizawa's tone. He was trying to work on that, though. He had told All Might he managed to control it against the Nomu, and they were planning on trying to replicate that. Though, it was a little hard since Recovery Girl still had not cleared him, and even just strength and endurance training were basically out of reach for at least a few more days. But once you can, it's not a bad idea to keep some secrets about your abilities. Aizawa finished. When you faced Shigaraki and the Nomu, no one had any idea you could breathe fire. If he had known the full extent of what you could do, he might have sent the Nomu at you from the beginning and never risked his own hand. You're saying to keep it a secret? Izuku asked tentatively. I'm saying that you keep a few tricks up your sleeve until you desperately need them. Aizawa said. You don't need to show your hand all at once. Though, he looked Izuku up and down. That may not be possible at present. Izuku cringed. XXXX. By the time Izuku was out of his bandages, he had already been to one counseling session and one Quirk counseling session. Neither of them were as bad as he thought they were going to be. He had a long discussion with his counselor on the nature of heroism and self-sacrifice before she started to poke and prod at his own circumstances. He had been honest about everything, even honest about the fact that it made him upset to talk about. She had made some good points, even if Izuku didn't like to think about it, and had given him some homework to talk to his mom about what had happened. I think you're dealing with all this about as well as you can be expected to, she had said, tapping her pen against her clipboard absent-mindedly. I think you would benefit from more counseling sessions, and I think there's a lot to get into. But if you don't want to continue long-term, I'm not going to require you to, as long as I don't think you pose a threat to yourself or others. She had informed him. A few more weeks of counseling until you meet your required minimum, and we can talk about what you're thinking of this whole process then. All in all, it was looking like he was going to have to go to 6 weeks of counseling, which seemed like a lot at first, but he thought about how fast the first session seemed to have gone, and it didn't seem so daunting. He liked Dr. Nakamura. She had told him that she had an empathic quirk from the get-go, that it let her get a better read on his emotions. She reminded him a lot of his mom, to be honest, and he didn't really mind talking to her, ultimately. His quirk counselor was more interesting. Though, Izuku had been informed that he was paired with a non-traditional quirk counselor due to the nature of his late manifestation. Maybe that was why the guy was so eccentric. It was an older man who had bright blue hair. He had told Izuku right from the get-go that it wasn't a mutation. He had started to go gray, so he bleached and dyed his hair for fun. How old are you? Izuku had wondered. He didn't seem that old, maybe in his 40s. You'll have to earn that one, Shibata had said. They spent the whole first session writing down every fact they knew about his quirk before Shibata had made him do breathing exercises for 15 minutes. The guy was kind of zany and evasive and countered every single one of Izuku's questions with another question, which Izuku could see as becoming annoying, but he also had a tendency to think out loud and answer his own questions with a few more minutes of thought, and Shibata encouraged that, so maybe Izuku didn't really mind. He would also interrupt Izuku when he went on for too long by sticking a candle in front of his face and telling him to light it, without thinking about it. The first time he did that, Izuku almost scorched Shibata's blue eyebrows off, but the older man didn't seem to mind at all. It was nice, having people he could talk to about all this. He had found getting one for all so daunting, like he was plunging into the deep end of a world he had barely scratched the surface of and was realizing that it was because he was. He had never thought too hard about how almost everyone he knew got a slow, steady, guided introduction into their quirk, and twice now, he had been thrown off the high dive with little to no warning. Not that he blamed All Might in any way. There wasn't a lot he could do to mentally prepare for the fact that he was receiving a legendary quirk passed down through the generations to heroes of true hearts and strong moral values to fight evil. He was feeling more confident in his quirk, even if he hadn't totally figured out how to control one for all yet. Him and All Might had the egg in the microwave discussion, but he still wasn't able to execute it consistently. He would have to think more on that, or maybe try and read about people who had strengthening quirks. It was a process, but Izuku didn't feel like he was just treading water anymore. He told his friends as much at lunch, and Uraraka had beamed at him. I'm glad to hear that, Deku, she said. Does that mean you can pop this popcorn for me? Kirishima asked, holding up a bag. Ida smacked it out of Kirishima's hand, and Izuku stifled a laugh. The redhead was sitting with them today, trying to get Uraraka to give him her notes. She was refusing, insisting he had been in class and had no excuse. Kirishima-kun, you should be ashamed, asking Midoriya-kun to utilize his quirk for such selfish reasons. I'm just asking. Izuku didn't think he could, actually. He was certain he would set the bag on fire at this point. Maybe that could be a good exercise in control, though. After all, being able to control the heat and flow of the flame long enough to be able to pop a bag of popcorn without setting it on fire would show a lot of skill on his part. He filed that away for later. Maybe that was something he could work on at home, or him and Aizawa could try something similar. Deku, you're muttering again. Uraraka knocked her shoulder against his. He jerked up. Oh, sorry. I was thinking about it. He rubbed the back of his neck sheepishly. Whenever I go off on a tangent, my court counselor makes me try and light a candle. The redhead across from him grinned back. How's that working out? Izuku shivered. Dangerously. Kirishima just laughed. It's all right, bro. You'll get the hang of it. So what do you think of the sports festival, Deku? Uraraka chirped. Izuku opened his mouth, and he was certain that his face must have lit up because Kirishima lurched across the table and covered his mouth. I don't think you're ready for the answer to that question, Uraraka, Kirishima said. Dash. Izuku tried to make noises through the palm over his mouth. You can let him go, Uraraka said. I don't mind. The hand was removed from his mouth, and Izuku immediately launched into his tangent. The sports festival is the most exciting event shown every year, and I've been watching it since I was Dash. Hey, is that Sue? He turned his head, having spotted the friendly green-haired girl out of the corner of his eye. She was sitting at a table alone, her notebook out, eating slowly. Yeah, he heard Kirishima say nervously, and Izuku looked back to his friends. Is everything okay? He asked. Uraraka fidgeted next to him. What? She's been pretty upset since USJ. Uraraka admitted. She's been sitting alone a lot. We've tried to invite her over, but I believe Azui is suffering from some stress related to USJ. Ida chipped in. We have tried to talk to her about it, but it is not our place to attempt to counsel her on what she experienced. I do not believe any of us could understand it. Izuku stood up. Deku Dash. I'm going to go talk to her, he said firmly. I want to make sure she's okay. Are you sure? Uraraka asked. Izuku nodded, and he slid out of the booth and made his way over to Tsu. He walked up to the end of the table, ignoring the eyes he knew were on him. Tsu, is it okay if I sit down here? He asked. Her head jerked up, and she looked lost for a moment when she saw him. Yes. Ribbit. He took a seat in front of her and smiled. Is everything okay? He asked. You seemed kind of lonely. She wasn't meeting his eyes, he realized. It only took a moment for him to spot the tremble in her hand. I'm okay, Midoriya. She slowly responded, looking up at him for a second, before flicking her eyes back down. Is this about USJ? He asked timidly. She didn't respond. He decided to be totally honest with her. He'd always found being an open book to be his best strategy. You know, I have to go to counseling now for it. She looked up at that, and Izuku nodded back. The school is requiring it. I didn't really want to, at first, but I went to the first few sessions and my counselor is really nice. And it's kind of nice to talk about it. I think it's helping me. Sometimes she has words to help me describe the way I feel that I couldn't really find on my own. I know that I might not be the person you want to talk about it with, but it really helped me, and I'll always listen. You're not angry with me? Sue burst out. She was making eye contact with him now, and her lip was trembling. She was gripping her pencil tightly. Why would I be angry with you? Izuku asked, confused. Because I left you. He could see unshed tears at the corners of her eyes. I left you, and I thought you were going to die. Izuku ran through all the events of USJ, trying to figure out why she would think he was angry with her. You didn't leave me. You saved Aizawa-sensei, Izuku said. And I left you behind, Midoriya. She rubbed her eyes furiously, and Izuku could see how hard she was trying not to cry. Sue, Aizawa couldn't move at all, and you couldn't know that Shigaraki would come for me next. Izuku insisted. Plus, I could still defend myself. Aizawa couldn't. I had opportunities to run away too, and I didn't take them. There had been several moments he could have escaped from the Nomu, but he had stayed behind to try and fight. For what it's worth, I think you made the right decision. I don't think anyone could have made a better one, with the pressure we were under. I froze, she said, a tear rolling down her cheek. And you didn't. I totally froze. He argued. When Shigaraki reached for you the first time, I could have helped and I freaked out. And when he reached for me, too. She made a quiet noise, rubbing her face again. I don't know if I did the right thing. I think you did, Sue. Izuku insisted. I do. He reached out, and touched her hand. It's okay to cry, you know. I cry like every day. Yesterday, I cried because I saw a really cute dog. He insisted. Kirishima hit his head during practice today, and I cried because it looked like it hurt. 2 days ago, Uraraka called me cute and pulled on my hair, and I cried. Sue laughed, wiping away tears on her face. Izuku didn't even want to get into how many times he had cried over the bear he had been given. It was an embarrassing amount of times. How do you not dehydrate? It's really hard, I'm not gonna lie, he said. She laughed again. Do you want to come sit with us? Not today, Midoriya, she said, but she seemed happier than before. I'm going to catch up on some work for now, but maybe tomorrow. Okay, Izuku said with a nod and smiled at her. You're always welcome. He went back to his seat, hoping something he said had helped. The next day, she sat with them at lunch. XXXX. Getting in shape to use his quirk better was harder than he thought. Not only had Aizawa taken to making him do suicide runs before their meeting every day, but he was forcing him to work on flexibility, which Izuku was admittedly pretty bad at. He hadn't been, before he started training with all might. But while he'd been building muscle and dragging refrigerators, he neglected to keep up with it, and now touching his toes left him disturbingly sore. Aizawa was appalled. Your specialty is hand-to-hand combat, he had said in disbelief. Izuku was currently in a downward dog position, trying to stretch out his hamstrings and cycling his feet. He was embarrassingly stiff. Flatten your back, Aizawa ordered. The blood was rushing to his head. Haven't had any real martial arts or combat training. He could practically see Aizawa pinching the bridge of his nose in his mind's eye. Lift your left leg up. And do what? Straighten it. Izuku attempted to follow his order and quickly crashed to the side, rolling onto his back. Ugh! He looked up to see his bedraggled teacher looming over him ominously. That was horrific, Aizawa told him. Izuku panted, looking up. I'll do it, but I don't think I understand what the purpose of this is. Izuku trusted his teacher and he would do whatever the man thought was best for training. But beyond just generally being healthy, Izuku didn't know what specifically flexibility went to. Aizawa sighed, his arms crossed over his chest. The bandages had been removed, though he still had a cast on his arm. Your fire breathing has given you a mid-range attack, but even if you increase the distance, I doubt you'll ever make it more than 20 feet. As such, you need to improve your close combat capabilities, and right now the impact on your body is destroying not just your bones, but your joints regularly. Izuku gingerly touched his own elbow, hence, learning an actual fighting style and increasing your flexibility. Oh, okay, that answers my question, Izuku said, sitting up slowly so the blood didn't rush to his head. Aizawa-sensei, I know you wanted to help me with my quirk, but why are you taking the time to teach me all this? You're my student, Aizawa said, simply. When Izuku stared back blankly, he sighed. Midoriya, most of your classmates have some kind of martial arts training already. It's common for quirk counselors to recommend to give them some discipline and bodily control for their quirk. Oh, it is my responsibility to ensure that you operate at an appropriate level to no longer be injured during class exercises. I am simply bringing you up to the starting line. Izuku scratched his head. I really was a lot further behind than I thought, huh? He said, with a sheepish smile. Aizawa nodded sharply. Now, get back into downward dog. And try not to fall over this time. Izuku groaned as he got back onto his hands and knees. XXXX. Deku. The sports festival was here. Izuku had been so nervous last night that his mother made him take a melatonin just so he would go to sleep. He had been training to try and get a handle on his quirk. And while he felt like he had come far with the fire breathing in the short amount of time he had it, he still felt like he was making very little progress with One for All. Maybe it was something to do with the fact that fire breathing was ultimately the quirk he was born with, so it came a little more naturally to him. But One for All was still a struggle to get a handle on. Sure, he knew he needed to decrease power output, but he still couldn't pull it off, and his ability to do it was way too inconsistent to even practice it without breaking his bones. He felt like he had an idea of how to use it, just on the cusp, almost formed, but with catching up on classes and getting ready for the sports festival, he hadn't had the time to really grind through it. This is your opportunity to tell the world, I am here, All Might had said to him. But then he took Izuku by the shoulder and crouched down. He forced Izuku to make eye contact with him. Young Midoriya, I want you to show the world how strong you are. But remember that I know how strong you are already. You have nothing to prove to me. I will be proud of you no matter how you place. What if I don't make an impression? Izuku had asked nervously, trying not to fidget in front of his mentor. Even when he was in his smaller, almost emaciated form, Izuku still felt the presence of All Might. He had just laughed, a big, booming sound. You will, young Midoriya. You couldn't stop yourself if you tried. It's in your nature. It was nice to know that All Might believed in him, and Izuku knew he wasn't trying to put pressure on him. But Izuku wanted so badly to do this for him. He wanted to make an impression. He wanted to tell the world he was there, for himself, and for the man who had changed his life so much. Deku, you deaf bastard. Izuku's head whipped around. They were all in a waiting room, dressed in their gym uniforms. He had been chatting with Jiro, Momo, and Kaminari. The three of them seemed to have formed a pretty strong bond after USJ. Bakugo, what the hell is your problem now? Jiro asked as the blonde boy stormed up to the table they were sitting at. Hi, Kakin. Can I help you? Izuku asked, blinking back at his already fired-up classmate. His hands were clenched at his sides, face screwed up in a semblance of rage. Izuku was pretty sure it was his resting expression at this point. You fucking dash. He shook his head like a dog, pointing a finger directly at Izuku. I'm gonna fucking kick your ass today. Okay. Izuku wasn't sure how he should respond. Don't okay me you deaf dumb motherfucker. Bakugo snapped. You've been riding your success since fucking USJ dash. Izuku wasn't sure he would qualify getting the shit beaten out of him as success, but he wasn't about to interrupt him now. Dash, getting a fucking secondary quirk dash, he muttered furiously. Dash, but even with your fancy little fire sneezes, don't get so fucking comfortable. I'm going to rip you apart. Oh, Bakugo was trying to challenge him, officially. Izuku had never realized that the former ones had stopped. Though, in a way Izuku figured this was kind of a compliment, coming from Bakugo. He wouldn't have even stopped to talk to Izuku if he didn't think he was some kind of threat. Otherwise, Izuku would have been delegated to the extras. Izuku beamed back and the blonde slammed his hand on the table, making everyone around them jump. What the fuck, Bakugo? Jiro shouted. Stop fucking smiling at me like that. He raged. Let's both do our best, Kakin. I'm going to blast that stupid expression off your dumb fucking face. He spat, turning on his heel. Izuku just waved back as he left, setting off small explosions in his hands and screaming in frustration to the ceiling. Midoriya. What was that? Momo asked, leaning in. Her brow was furrowed. Izuku turned back, still smiling. That was a compliment, I think. Who's that weird purple guy? Kaminari interrupted, as the two girls exchanged looks. Izuku twisted to see where his classmate was looking. It was another student, one that Izuku didn't recognize except maybe in passing. He was probably in Class 1B or one of the other courses. After all, they had been told general studies courses and support courses were also participating for the chance to potentially transfer into the hero courses. The student in question had almost lavender-colored hair, a style similar to Izuku's own but pushed back from his face in a wild fashion. His eyes were a similar color as well, though the most distinctive feature was the dark circles under them. He reminded Izuku of Aizawa when he was using his quirk. He was staring at the exchange that had just happened in shock, clearly not familiar with the personalities of Class 1A. He must be in general studies. Momo said. We should invite him to sit with us. Izuku decided out loud. Midoriya, I don't know if that's Dash. Izuku waved at him. It took a second for the student to zone in, but then he turned, as if to look around and make sure it wasn't him Izuku was waving to. You should come sit with us, he called out, and for a brief moment, it looked like the student had been slapped. Before his jaw tensed and he turned, walking away. Midoriya, I think you're too nice, Jiro said, as Izuku turned back around, a little disappointed. I just like to get along with people. Even if he isn't in our class specifically, he's still our classmate. He set his jaw in his hand. Besides, we can't let Kakin scare everyone off. I disagree. I think that's his best use, to be honest. Kaminari said, holding up a hand. Unwanted visitor? Boom. Throw Bakugo at them. Jiro snorted, covering her nose. If you told me that warp villain still had nightmares about some crazy, exploding motherfucker gunning for him, I would believe you. She added, laughing out loud. I don't know how you still call him Kakin, Midoriya. There is nothing cute about him. Izuku just shrugged. I don't know. I've just always called him that. There was the sound of someone clearing their throat behind him, and Izuku turned in his seat again to see Todoroki standing behind him. It's your other boyfriend. Jiro supplied helpfully. That's not nice, Jiro-chan. Izuku said absently, blinking at the split-haired teen. Though, to be fair, Todoroki looked embarrassed coming up to him. Is something wrong, Todoroki-kun? I had meant to speak to you before, but I suppose Bakugo beat me to the punch. Todoroki said. He set his jaw. Objectively, Midoriya, I think I'm stronger than you. Oh yeah, for sure. Aizawa made me do yoga the other day, and I could barely touch my toes dash. Kaminari snorted so hard it sounded like it hurt. He covered his mouth, his head tipping back as he almost fell out of his chair. Izuku turned to look at him. Are you okay, Kaminari-kun? Jiro tapped the table behind him, and he turned back. He's trying to challenge you, dummy. Oh. Izuku tilted his head at Todoroki. I'm sorry. You weren't finished. Izuku said, clasping his hands in front of his mouth and gesturing for the split-haired boy to continue. Todoroki sighed heavily. We're going to be opponents today, and while I am grateful for what you did at USJ, I intend to beat you, he said, though he seemed to be crumbling under the green-haired boy's innocent gaze. Aren't we all opponents? Izuku asked cluelessly. Yeah, but he's saying he actually thinks you're a threat. Jiro filled in, crossing her arms and tilting her head at Todoroki. Right? Oh, so like Kakin. It's kind of a compliment. Izuku said. There was a pause. I thought this would go easier than this. Todoroki muttered. I just never mind. He turned as if to walk away, but apparently was not going to be let off that easy. What the fuck do you think you're doing, you fucking Canadian flag? Kaminari howled with laughter and fell out of his chair as Bakugo stormed back over. He's my fucking rival, and he's not even the one you should be worried about. Abominable snowman. It was kinda sweet. Izuku couldn't decide. He scooted his chair back as Bakugo literally shoved Todoroki. I'm gonna go dash, he whispered, slipping away and waving at his friends. Get back here, Deku. XXXX. They were getting ready to head into the stadium, lined up against the wall. They could hear Present Mike hyping up the stadium over the speaker, as well as informing them that Aizawa would be providing his commentary as well. Honestly, Izuku loved his teacher, but he couldn't think of anything funnier than Present Mike emceeing with Aizawa at his side. I still can't believe Bakugo's the one giving the speech, Ribbit. Sue said, leaning against the wall. He's going to say something stupid. I guess words aren't really his strong suit. Izuku admitted, looking up and down the hall. Where's my Netta? He wondered out loud. You didn't hear? Sue asked, tone changing suddenly. Izuku shook his head, leaning back into position. What? Is he okay? Did something happen? Sue put her hand on his shoulder, giving him a serious look. He transferred out of the hero course, Midoriya. That shocked him. He knew Mineta had been quiet lately, ever since USJ. He had been told later that Mineta, despite not being injured, had only come back to school a few days before Izuku had. He figured that it had been the stress of the incident hitting him hard, but hadn't realized how bad it was. He held a hand to his mouth in shock. Oh my God, he said. He shook his head abruptly. I should have tried to talk to him. I didn't realize he was so upset. He turned in horror to Tsu. She just shrugged. I wouldn't worry about it too much, she said. He didn't have the best motivations for becoming a hero, and he was second to last in the quirk apprehension test, only above you, and he was using his quirk the whole time. But if he transferred out because of stress, that's not fair. Izuku started saying, thinking about what he could do to help the little purple-haired boy. He didn't love Mineta, but he somehow felt personally responsible for what happened to Mineta at USJ. His counselor would probably tell him that was unreasonable. Midoriya, I spoke to him. Sue said. She shrugged again. He just said that it wasn't worth it. That he didn't want to be a hero enough to put his life on the line. I don't think it's a bad thing. It's probably good that he figured this out while he was still in school, instead of after graduation. She was making a good point. After all, saving lives and putting your life on the line to do so was something quintessentially heroic. It was the essence of the job, in Izuku's opinion. And if it truly wasn't what Mineta wanted, he would accept that. But he couldn't help but worry that it wasn't. Sue seemed to see the concern on his face, and she patted his arm. You can't worry about everyone, Ribbit. Oh, I can and I will. Izuku promised, but Sue just laughed. They headed in eventually, to present Mick's booming voice and a screaming crowd. It was exciting, certainly. Izuku could see all the pro heroes, and his face must have shown how excited he was. Before long, his entire class was laughing at him good-naturedly. Kirishima asked him if he was going to pass out, and Izuku swatted the hand away that went to poke him between the eyes, unable to hide the blush on his face. Everything about it was so exciting and unbelievable. It was just another reminder of how far Izuku had come and how hard he worked and how his dream was paying off. He truly did want to do well, not just for All Might, but for himself. I'm coming in first. Bakugo stepped down from the podium, hands in his pockets, a disdainful look on his face. The stadium was dead silent. Present Mike started up his commentary at the same moment the audience reacted, so no one heard Kaminari laugh, so loud he discharged an electric shock that hit Jiro besides Class 1A. She smacked his head, and he fell to his knees, wiping tears from his eyes. Bakugo is the funniest person I've ever met, Kaminari declared. You couldn't make that up. A stadium full of professional heroes and he dash. Izuku suppressed his own giggle as Bakugo walked past them all, head held high. Not an ounce of embarrassment or shame. What's it to you, extras? Chapter 5. Izuku ended up not using his quirk at all for the first challenge. Or, well, maybe he did. After all, he had felt the heat coming up from the pile of landmines he launched himself off of and wasn't sure if it was his increased temperature resistance protecting him or not. Still, it was pretty satisfying hearing the scream of rage from Bakugo as he literally stepped on him, and the look of shock on his face right before it happened. As he had rocketed towards the finish line, he could hear his childhood friend spitting out dirt and curses. Though, after finding out about the 10 million point target on his back, he was kind of wishing he had come in second or third instead. Maybe he wouldn't have had the entirety of his class gunning for that stupid headband if he hadn't. No, he told himself. He really didn't mind having to work a little harder to stay in the game during the second round. He wouldn't trade that first-place victory in the race for anything. The cavalry battle was interesting as well. He had intended to use his fire quirk to ward off those who might get close enough, but he saw the hesitance in Tokoyami's face when he mentioned it during the planning period. He thought hard for a second about how Tokoyami had confessed to Dark Shadow not being as strong during the day. He ultimately decided to abstain. After all, the goal was to remain out of reach of any team anyways, with Uraraka's quirk and Hatsume's support gear. It would be worse to sacrifice their defense just to get in some cheap shots, he had decided, thinking that Dark Shadow must be vulnerable to the light from his fire. Besides, he thought back to what Aizawa had said. Sure, 1A knew about the fire quirk, but there was a third stage after this, and there were going to be some people from 1B for certain, with the way the cavalry battle had been going. They came face to face with other teams only a few times. At one point, Monoma's team got close and desperate to not use his fire quirk. Izuku had swung out before they got away and cracked Monoma across the jaw. The boy had looked at him, stunned, as his team launched back into the air, just in time for Bakugo to bowl them over and rip all the headbands off Monoma's neck. Though, Izuku would admit that the grip Bakugo had on Monoma's neck and he ripped them off was perhaps unnecessarily tight. He throttled the skinny blonde boy, screaming swears. They had decided to focus on defense, but a few times, Izuku was surprised to feel a headband drop over his neck. He twisted to look and saw Hatsume, with a giant extendable claw hand, grinning back. She opened and closed it a few times, demonstrating the grip strength. She had been ripping them off other teams as they got closer. On a few, she latched the claw hand straight onto their heads and tore down the formation. Izuku just grinned back. There was a little bit of blood on the end. Hatsume, you might want to be more careful with that. I think you're scratching people, he said, frowning. Oops, Hatsum said mockingly. He heard Tokoyami laugh. And then it all came to a head, with Todoroki snatching the 10 million points away with help from Ida's reciproburst. Izuku thought at that point that they might be able to snag a few more headbands and stay in the game without his former headband, and voiced it to his teammates. It might not be worth tangling with Todoroki's team again. What do you want, Deku? Uraraka's voice had been deadly serious. I want my fucking 10 million points back, he said, out loud, quickly covering his mouth when he realized he swore. Uraraka giggled. Then let's go get them, she said. They went after Todoroki's team with everything they had, and he heard Momo shriek when they charged them. He couldn't figure out why, until some smoke curled up into his eyes, and he realized his mouth was burning with unreleased fire. He looks like a demon, Kaminari shouted as they charged them. Todoroki was wearing several stacks of headbands around his neck, having accumulated 10 or so high-point headbands. But Izuku was certain that the one he wanted was on top. He couldn't see the points on them, so he had to make an educated choice. Hatsum, Izuku hissed. Hand me the claw hand. He felt it smack into his palm, and he heard Todoroki order Kaminari to charge up. Izuku realized what was about to happen, and he pressed the extender. The claw hand shot out 20 feet, colliding with Kaminari's face and latching on. The blonde screamed in surprise, almost falling over as the entire formation sagged in his direction, screeching to a halt that almost flung Todoroki off the top. Get it off me, Kaminari yelled, trying to pull the hand off, but it was stuck on. Izuku felt a little bad, but he could hear Hatsum laughing maniacally behind him, and he just swallowed his guilt. He handed the claw back to her, still lashed onto Kaminari and holding Team Todoroki in place, lest they break formation and get disqualified. Kaminari is trapped in Team Midoriya's claw creation dash. Oh Jesus, Eraserhead, what are you teaching your students? As soon as they were close enough, he lurched forward, trying to grab the headband on top. He saw Todoroki's eyes widen, and he felt one for all flowing through his arm as it shot out. Don't let the egg explode, don't let the egg explode dash. A burst of flame on Todoroki's hand had Izuku jerking back. It went out as soon as it had appeared, Todoroki looking equally shocked about what just happened. In the confusion, Izuku grabbed the top one off Todoroki's neck and his team launched away, Hatsum finally releasing Kaminari, blowing him a kiss. There was a hand-shaped bruise over the center of his face, and he looked dazed. They screeched to a halt on the side, and they could see Bakugo's team charging in, Bakugo already launching off his horse. Hatsum, give it to me, Uraraka cried, and the pink-haired girl tossed the claw hand to her. It shot through the air, much further than Izuku would have thought possible, and nailed Bakugo directly in the chest. He shrieked as it grasped and tore through the front of his uniform, sending him flying back into his own formation. His teammates grunted as he landed, trying to catch him. You have good aim, Uraraka, Tokoyami complimented her. While they had time, Izuku flipped over the headband. 70 points. That wasn't going to be enough. We have to go back in, he cried, his team taking off towards Todoroki. The claw hand shot out again, but this time, the split-haired boy was ready for it, and he froze it in mid-air dash. Just as the time went off, their formations broke apart instantly, Uraraka removing the weightless effect from all of them. Izuku spun, stricken with panic, to face his team. Guys, I'm so sorry. I grabbed the wrong one, and now we're dash. There were tears coming to his eyes. It's okay, Deku. You know that dash, Uraraka started, trying to reach out and comfort him. Midoriya, Tokoyami said, as Izuku tried to wipe the tears off his face, turning to his friend. Dark Shadow was out, a headband in its shadowy beak. I got this while you distracted Todoroki. The headband flipped over. 10 million points. Izuku practically assaulted Tokoyami, hitting him like a freight train and knocking the air out of him as he bowled him over. He grabbed his bird-like face, tears springing from his eyes, and he let out cries of happiness. Tokoyami, I could kiss you. Please don't dash. Do it. Hatsum cupped her hands and called from the sidelines. Izuku planted a kiss on Tokoyami's beak, ignoring the exaggerated gagging noise coming from the boy he held firmly in his grasp. He sprang off Tokoyami and hooped, before falling to his knees, tears streaming from his eyes uncontrollably. And green bean plants a wet one on the dark shadow himself dash. Present Mick's voice boomed over the speaker, snorting uncontrollably. Hatsum retracted her claw hand, the ice breaking off, and shot it back into the air in celebration, screaming in excitement, as Uraraka embraced Izuku, trying to get him to stop crying. Izuku could barely see the other teams through his tears, but he knew they were looking at the four of them like they were nuts. He could even see Todoroki staring, grasping the rest of his headbands in one hand. Team Todoroki made it through, in second, but Team Midoriya was first. XXXX. So first place in both events, huh? Izuku heard a voice behind him, rotating to see the lavender-haired boy from earlier. His team had made it through as well, though Izuku had some concerns given what Ojiro had said when he dropped out. The boy tilted his head, a grin on his face. He opened his mouth to respond, when Ojiro slid in between them, glaring at the lavender-haired boy. He smacked his tail over Izuku's mouth, preventing him from answering. "Don't say anything, Midoriya," Ojiro said, narrowing his eyes at the other boy. He grabbed Izuku by the shoulders and hustled him away. When Ojiro told him what had happened, knowing that Izuku was going to be facing off against Shinso, the lavender-haired boy, in the first round, he felt a lot of things. He felt a little scared for his own progress in the tournament. He felt bad for Ojiro, who had been taken advantage of. He felt bad for Shinso. It was an odd thing, as they were about to be opponents. But they weren't enemies. And frankly, Izuku knew a thing or two about having a quirk that inspired fear in people. His own had scared the shit out of him. It was memories of this exact quirk that had haunted his dreams for years, despite him being able to clear it from his mind in the day. It was the exact quirk that had hurt his mom, had hurt other people. Midoriya Hisashi was in prison for hurting people, but he had never been prosecuted for what he did to his own wife and son, and something about that stuck with Izuku. His counselor had said that sometimes the acknowledgement of pain and trauma was cathartic in its own way, and that might be something he felt like he was lacking. She said that he should see if charges could be pursued, all these years later. It made Izuku feel kind of stupid. After all, the man was already in prison for life for the 6 people he killed with his quirk. No law enforcement officer or lawyer was going to waste their time trying to give more time to a man who was going to be serving multiple life sentences already. But she was right, he thought. So maybe Izuku could sympathize with Shinso. He must want to be a hero too, he had thought. After all, no other general studies student had even made it past the first challenge. But Izuku still had to beat him. They were taking their noon lunch break, and just as Izuku was walking to get some food, he heard a voice behind him. Midoriya. He turned to see Todoroki. He smiled at him. "Hey, Todoroki-kun." He could swear the scarred boy winced, but it was so fast he wasn't sure he saw it. "Let's talk," he said grimly, and Izuku ended up following him to somewhere they could speak in private. "Are you All Might's love child or something?" was the first question out of the boy's mouth, and Izuku almost fell over. "Oh God, no. But I wish," he had said with a nervous laugh. If only Midoriya Hisashi had never existed. And he was in no way prepared for what Todoroki told him next. About Endeavor, about quirk marriages, about the scar on his face everyone assumed came from the fire he wouldn't use. Izuku choked back tears. It felt inappropriate to cry for someone else's pain. He didn't want Todoroki to think he was pitying him, but he couldn't help but grieve for him. He sounded so broken, so alone. Izuku had spent so much time thinking that he was just cool and aloof, but he wasn't. He was lonely and scared. At least Izuku was safe now, but that was something that it seemed like Todoroki had never known. "You made me break my pledge," Todoroki said. "Wait, Midoriya, stop crying." Izuku had his hand clamped over his mouth. "No, I'm fine. Continue." His voice was muffled as he blinked back tears. Todoroki sighed, holding a hand up to his face. "You're going to dehydrate," he said. "See, continue." Izuku choked. He couldn't tell him that Todoroki's own story was hitting close to home for him, that the pain and betrayal that came with abuse was still fresh on his mind, even fresher since USJ. "That's why I'm going to beat you, without using my father's quirk. Whether or not you're actually All Might's child, he has his eye on you. I'm going to achieve what my father couldn't, without him. Aizawa's words echoed back to him, and Izuku had responded before he could say anything. It's not his quirk. Todoroki blinked back. What? It's not his quirk, Todoroki-kun. I don't know if there's anything I can say that can help you right now. Izuku admitted. He was getting the distinct feeling that Todoroki was determined to go down a lonely path, that there was plenty of pain and unresolved trauma bubbling to the surface. But I do know that it's not his quirk. It's yours. You don't understand, Midoriya? Todoroki said quietly, shaking his head. Why wouldn't I? Izuku asked. You have people, Todoroki said, through a clenched jaw. You have friends. You have family. You have people who love you, who would damn near die for you. You have a mentor that is genuinely all everyone says he is, and more. My father has taken that all away from me, and I will crush him if it's the last thing I do. Izuku just wanted to hug him, but Todoroki looked like he would ice him if he did. Izuku took a slow step forward. Todoroki-kun, he said softly, I think I understand more than you know, but a lot of people have supported me to be here. I fought so hard just to get to what I thought was the starting line, and then I found out I wasn't anywhere near it. I'm still fighting, and people are still helping me. So it's not just my own hopes that I have riding on me. It's their hard work too. I'm going to make them proud of me. So I'm coming for you, Todoroki-kun. Get ready. He turned and walked away before he could say anything else. He was a little afraid that he would break and pull the taller boy into a tight hug, and that seemed like the last thing Todoroki wanted right then. Todoroki needed help, he knew that much. And Izuku wanted to help him. He couldn't keep his nose out of other people's business. He just wasn't sure how. XXXX. Is it bad to stick your nose in other people's business? Izuku asked All Might. They were meeting somewhere private, All Might having sought him out before his match. He had put a big hand on Izuku's shoulder in his full form. I suppose it depends on what it is. All Might answered, seeming caught off guard by Izuku's question. Izuku clenched his fists at his side. Something bad. He doesn't have anyone to help him. I don't know if anyone will. All Might bent down, raising an eyebrow. Are you talking about someone in particular? All Might asked, voice filled with concern. Izuku wasn't sure if it was his secret to share. He wanted to help Todoroki, but he also knew the kind of retribution that could come from this. Retribution that would only blow back on a Todoroki. Besides, who would believe that the number 2 hero would hurt his own family like that? It wasn't time to share, not until they could figure out a real plan. It's hypothetical. Izuku knew without a doubt that All Might didn't believe him. But as bad as Izuku felt about not being able to share the full truth with him, he knew it was to protect his classmate. He would tell him when it was safe. Then I would say that kind of meddling is exactly what heroes do, young Midoriya. All Might tilted his head, especially when no one else will. What if it were to affect my placement in the competition? Izuku said, wringing his hands. You wouldn't be disappointed? A giant hand encapsulated his shoulder, warm and comforting. Midoriya, I could never be disappointed if you were helping someone in need. You've already made me proud. Even though I've already cried on national television today? All Might laughed. Even though you've already cried on national television today. He ruffled Izuku's hair. Maybe stop being such a crybaby, though. He teased. Are you scared? Izuku blew out a breath that knocked some hair from his face. Yeah, he admitted. There was no point in lying about it. He shook his head. Smile? Even when you're filled with anxiety and fear. All Might said. It helps to ease the pain. All Might straightened up, smiling down at him. I'll be watching, young Midoriya. XXXX. And then there was Shinso Hitoshi. Izuku broke. He was ashamed. He'd been warned. But he couldn't keep his big fat mouth shut, and now he was walking towards the edge of the bounds, against his will. It was like a buzzing static in his head, being a prisoner in his own body. Everything was going black, like Ojiro had said, and he knew he would be out soon, gone. Nothing left until Shinso had decided he was done. He was getting closer and closer to the boundary when a dark mass began to take shape. On the tunnel, on the other side. Like an amorphous blob of blinking eyes that stared out at him. They were slowly starting to take shape, and he hears whispers in his ears. Don't let him, kiddo. You are not alone. He needed a shock. That's what Ojiro had said. Anything. He needed something. And he couldn't move dash. Wait, no. He could feel his fingers twitch, the power of one for all pouring in. But they would break. He could win now, but who knew what would happen a match from now? You have another quirk, don't you? He wasn't sure if it was his own thought or someone else's. But they were right. And he could still breathe. He poured the power into his chest, feeling it suddenly constrict as he sucked in a breath through a clenched jaw. Egg in the microwave. Egg in the microwave. Egg in the microwave. And he released a jet of flames, white hot, that soared for well over 20 feet. Well past the limit he and Izawa had imagined, almost licking at the lower rungs of the crowd, who screeched and dove back from the flames. Izuku cringed as the brainwashing broke, knowing he had maybe singed a few audience members. He turned around. He tuned out present mics screaming his surprise over the speakers, tuned out even the quiet what? That he could swear came from Izawa. He saw Shinso's lips moving, but the blood was rushing in his ears. His chest hurt a little from using one for all on his lungs, but it didn't feel like anything was broken, just like he had a little more kick. That's quite a quirk there. Hadn't heard about that one yet. Just the super strength dash, Shinso was saying. Izuku braced both his hands against his chest, and he could feel Shinso stutter. Pretty interesting. I thought yours were pretty heroic before, but I don't know now. Tell me about it. Izuku kept his mouth clamped shut as he started to push, Shinso struggling. But he wasn't very strong, and Izuku hadn't spent 10 months dragging refrigerators for nothing. He didn't need his quirk to beat Shinso, as long as he kept his stupid mouth shut. He'd been given a second chance. If he squandered it, he didn't deserve to win. Must be nice, huh? Having been born with a heroic quirk. Shinso was running his mouth. What? Don't want to answer. Izuku kept pushing and Shinso tried to grind his feet back, pushing back. He punched Izuku in the face, his jaw snapping to the side. But honestly, these days, Izuku barely felt it. He did feel the hands around his neck a little more, ignoring the gasps of the crowd, and Shinso tried to swing him around, to get away from the edge of the boundary. But he was moving his weight all wrong, and Izuku could see he wasn't going to get the leverage necessary. Izuku bent his knees, grabbed Shinso around the waist, and lifted. Fuck, what are you doing? He kept asking questions, trying to elicit a response, even as he kicked his legs at Izuku, twisting in his grasp. But he was unable to break his grip, and Izuku tossed him over the boundary line. Shinso tumbled to the ground, cursing. He stared up at Izuku, as the declared victory for Izuku. You don't get it. He hissed. You don't know what it's like, being born with a villain's quirk. He clenched his fists, looking up at Izuku. I have to fight so hard just to be here. I'm not even at the starting line. He shook his head, and Izuku felt like his heart broke. He crouched down. Shinso, he said, I know what it's like being born with a villain's quirk. His voice was quiet enough that there was no way any microphone was picking it up. He saw Shinso's eyes widened. Midoriya Hisashi hadn't been a villain, really. Just an angry man with a quirk. But close enough, in this day and age. You're lying. His voice was quiet. Izuku leaned in, holding a hand out. He shook his head. This isn't a game to me. I'm serious about this. I know everyone thinks I'm one step away from being a villain, but I won't let that happen. He was convicted under the name of Iwasaki Hisashi, but I always knew him as Midoriya Hisashi. You can look him up. Shinso hadn't taken his hand yet, but was instead eyeing Izuku carefully, like the moment he took it Izuku was going to push him back down again. It felt almost good, honestly, to let that part of his secret go to someone besides his counselor. Izawa and All Might had both offered themselves as listeners, but he had stayed away from details, like names and dates. Do you want to be a hero, Shinso? He asked. Of course I do. Shinso spat. That's why I'm here. That's why I want to transfer into the hero course. I couldn't get in through the entrance exam, but I will get there somehow. You can't help the things you long for. Izuku smiled. He took Shinso's hand. He was done waiting. Then let's be friends, Shinso-kun. He slowly pulled him up to his feet. Honestly, fuck everyone else. Izuku said, giving him a sneaky smile. I think your quirk is pretty cool. The lavender-haired boy was staring at him like he was lost. Midoriya Izuku, was it? He asked, finally. Yeah. You know, I could have just brainwashed you then. Shinso said, eyes unreadable. Izuku shrugged. I trust you. Izuku paused. You know, you are not alone. Not as much as you think you are. Shinso stared at him like he'd punched him in the face. He stilled before he finally spoke again. Don't lose too pitifully to the next guy, okay? XXXX. You have a fire, Quirk, came the surprised voice as Izuku walked out through the tunnel on his side to cheers. It was Endeavor himself, standing there, waiting for him. His fiery facial hair gave off barely any heat, but was constantly moving, just like Izuku had seen on TV. He was a huge, intimidating figure. And yesterday, Izuku would have been excited to meet him. Now all he felt was disgust. He didn't want to look at him. He wanted to throw a punch, but everything about that was a bad idea. He knew some of it was his own, unresolved anger at his father bursting forth. The man he had never had an opportunity to face. He could see him in Endeavor instantly. The way he held himself, the way he smiled, the idea that he thought he could come here and intimidate Izuku at all. Maybe Izuku was projecting. Or maybe all abusive pieces of shit were the same. Yes. Izuku realized that he had failed to answer Endeavor. I do. It's pretty interesting. Almost scorched a few audience members. Endeavor narrowed his eyes. You'll be seeing my son next. Izuku knew Todoroki's round hadn't happened yet, but he also knew it was a match between Todoroki and Shiro. He knew who was going to win that one. Probably. Izuku said, his tone clipped. Can I help you with something, sir? You don't seem impressed that the number 2 hero is speaking to you. Endeavor noted. Though, I suppose you're All Might's boy, aren't you? Hard to be impressed with number 2 when your mentor is number 1. The words were spiteful, disdainful, and the tone was insulting. Izuku bit his tongue. No, sir. You just remind me of my own father, that's all. Izuku said, keeping his tone as neutral as he could. Flattery won't get you anywhere, kid. Endeavor said, his voice joking but his face vindictive. That wasn't my intention at all, sir. The green-haired boy said honestly. Shudo is just like me, you know. Endeavor said, with a wicked grin. Try not to give him an embarrassing round. I disagree, sir. I don't think he's anything like you. There was more spite in his voice than he intended, but Izuku just turned to walk away before he said something that got Todoroki in trouble with his father. I didn't dismiss you, Dash, came the angry hiss, the pro-hero reacting to the bite in Izuku's words. He could feel the heat flare behind him from his fire, and then a hand on his arm, yanking him around to look at Endeavor. His grip was so hard Izuku wondered if it was going to bruise as he was pulled to face an angry Endeavor, his fire flowing from his facial hair. He glowered down at Izuku, looming over him. Izuku ripped his arm away. Excuse me, sir, he said, and walked away. XXXX. Izuku had barely used his quirk, he realized, sitting in the stands, watching Uraraka's round against Bakugo. It hurt to see her take so many hits, but he could also see the hard set to her jaw, her narrowed eyes, her determination. He didn't know if she was going to win this. Bakugo was a fiend in combat. But he wanted to hug her so tight and tell her how proud he was. It was a crazy, ballsy plan. He had started to notice the veritable meteor shower of debris hovering over Bakugo's head that the explosive teen had not yet, and Izuku suspected few had. He smiled to himself. Even if she didn't win, she was going to give Bakugo a scare. But he had been thinking back on his own performance and realized that he hadn't even used his quirk except to break Shinso's brainwashing. It seemed crazy, honestly. Even in the first challenge, when he had taken out one of the robots without using his quirk at all. He probably could have taken out more if he used his head a little bit more. Or if that had been the objective, he reflected. But he had won the cavalry battle with a well-selected team and some determination. Even though he'd been ready to use his quirk against Todoroki, he hadn't actually done so. He could have laughed. His dream, that seemed so far off once, hadn't really been so. He probably could have gotten the points he needed during the entrance exam without a quirk. He would have won the first 2 challenges without it too. It was almost funny how far it had once seemed, and now Izuku had 2 quirks, and he had just spent the past day using neither of them. If anything too, Hatsum kicking Ida's ass had been proof that you didn't need a quirk. You just had to use your head. He looked out at the battle, watching his short, slim friend stare down Bakugo with a fire in her eyes he hadn't seen before. Yeah, he decided. He was exactly where he was meant to be. Chapter 6. When Izuku stepped into the ring against Todoroki, He didn't know how the round was going to go. He knew his fire wouldn't be as effective as he would like it to be. He couldn't hold it for long enough to break through a giant ice mass like the one Todoroki had used before. There was absolutely no way he was getting out of this without breaking some bones, to be honest. He had to get close, he knew that much. Todoroki was still weak in close combat fighting, and that was Izuku's strongest point. So when the match started and Todoroki sent that first wave of ice at him, Izuku flicked his finger and dove right in. It ripped through the ice like it was nothing, the wind pressure sending gasps through the crowd as Izuku dove forward. He ignored the pain in his hand, clenching his left first, leaping over the ice rubble and taking a swing. Todoroki dodged, stepping back, but Izuku rolled to the side and brought his leg up for a kick that caught Todoroki in the ribs and flung him to the side. He caught himself on an ice structure and sent another wave of ice Izuku's way. Izuku rolled, dodging it, letting out a burst of flame when it got too close. They were closer to the center than the outskirts now, Izuku getting to his feet. They were circling each other, waiting for the next attack. Todoroki-kun, he said. Todoroki was staring at him, specifically his hand. You broke your finger, he said, in that attack. That's okay, Izuku said. I still have a few tries left. Todoroki's eyes widened, and Izuku sprang forward. He leapt over one layer of ice, and Todoroki ducked down, dropping into a crouch as he sent a pillar of ice overhead. Izuku opened his mouth and let out the hottest burst of flame he could, destroying the pillar in an instant. The flames licked towards Todoroki, who covered himself in a layer of ice to defend from them, before he ducked away. A spike nearly caught Izuku in the side as it jutted out, but he dropped down and dove out of the way. By the time he looked up, there was another, bigger wave of ice coming at him, far too big for Izuku to leap over. He took a deep breath and flicked his next finger. Crack! It blew out apart, the wind pressure forcing Izuku back a few feet, skidding against the now icy ground. He took a deep breath and straightened, knees bent in case he needed to dodge again. He could see Todoroki, bent over as well, before he straightened up. His eyes looked wilder than they had before, more present. Good. I can do this all day, Todoroki-kun, he said, letting out a small breath of fire on his exhale. And you're starting to look a little cold. It was true. While on this side of the arena, Izuku had blown apart all of Todoroki's attacks, scattering the ice. All the rubble had ended up on Todoroki's side. He had frozen some of it in place to prevent it from blowing back on him, and had even guarded against being flung over the boundary with walls of ice behind him. It was getting cold, too. The air itself was chilled from Todoroki's quirk. Still, it was much colder on Todoroki's side than his, and Izuku had the fire in his chest to keep him warm. The split-haired boy looked like he was freezing, beginning to shiver, patches of snow sticking to him. I'm fine, Todoroki said. You should worry about yourself, he said, his eyes flicking to the stands. Izuku knew exactly who he was looking for. Hey, I'm your opponent, he said. They were about 15 feet apart, he decided. What dash? Izuku breathed a cone of flames that was once again more about area and distance than it was heat. They filled the field in front of him, shooting towards Todoroki. He saw the boy's eyes widen and he shot more ice forward, chilling the air as best he could before they got to him. Those breathing exercises were really paying off, Izuku decided. If you used your quirk, you wouldn't be cold. Todoroki's eyes hardened. Don't talk to me about my father's quirk. A wall of ice, bigger than before, shot towards Izuku, who tried to leap back. But it was spreading from Todoroki faster than he could manage, and it was looking like it was going to shape up to be almost as big as the one that encased Zero, with the way the air temperature dropped. So Izuku broke another finger, unable to curl his hand into a fist. Instead, he hooked it in his mouth to flick it. It shattered, letting out a terribly loud noise that drowned out the screaming crowd as shards of ice started to fly. People cowered in their seats, and the beginnings of the large structure came down around them. Izuku tipping his head back and letting out the longest jet of flame he could manage to protect himself from falling debris. He was a little short of breath, but he didn't want to get taken out by a chunk of ice. When he tipped his head forward, he could see Todoroki staring at him with disbelief, trembling visibly now. He heard Present Mike comment on it over the speaker, and Izuku really realized how much Todoroki had limited himself by not using his left side at all. He could probably send massive ice structures to crush Izuku indefinitely if he would just regulate his temperature with his fire. What are you doing this for? Fear, Izuku asked. He understood that one clearly. Everyone else is giving their all, and you're barely using half. It's insulting. Izuku shook his head. You're making me feel like Kakin. Todoroki stiffened. Why you dash? His teeth were chattering. Izuku took off after him like a bullet, and Todoroki jerked, sending another pillar towards him. But it was slow. And Izuku was doing just fine. Egg in the microwave. Egg in the microwave. Egg in the microwave dash. He swung his left, unbroken arm, feeling the familiar thrum of one for all under the skin. He nailed Todoroki in the stomach, even as the boy tried to twist out of the way. He went shooting back, letting out a garbled noise of pain. Izuku had felt the bones crack under his fist. Todoroki slammed into an ice wall of his own, making it the last second, coughing as he laid against it, before pulling himself to his feet. He let out a shaky breath, eyeing Izuku coldly. Fuck dash. The pillar almost crashed into Izuku, and he rolled back, dodging it. You keep saying I'm done, Todoroki said, straightening up. But you've broken every finger on your right hand. Izuku's fingers were swollen and purple, almost useless at his side. I'm ending this now, before you get yourself killed. A mass of ice shot towards him, smaller than the last large attack Todoroki had sent, but substantial regardless. Izuku blew it apart with one of his already broken fingers. It hurt like a bitch. But when the rubble settled, his limp hand hanging at his side, Todoroki couldn't tear his eyes away. We're not done yet, Izuku said. He curled his broken hand into a fist, and Todoroki turned a little green. You're crazy. I spoke to your father. Todoroki's whole demeanor shifted, like something was dawning on him. He paid you, didn't he? To take this so far. Izuku pulled up his sleeve with his good hand, where there was a bruise forming on his arm from Endeavor grabbing him. No, believe it or not, I'm not doing this for anyone else. He just got angry when I said you were nothing like him. Todoroki closed his eyes, and Izuku felt like he knew exactly the emotions that were crashing down on the split-haired boy. More than anything, the feeling of helplessness in the face of danger. The lesson that Todoroki had probably spent his life learning Izuku had learned only recently. He could have all the power in the world and still be so helpless when it counted. And when Todoroki's eyes opened, they flicked to Izuku's broken hand. How can you say that, standing there like that? We are not our fathers, Izuku said, taking a step forward and clenching his fist. I know what it's like, to inherit a quirk you would rather have been born without. Todoroki tilted his head, brow knitting together. Wait, are you All Might's dash? No, Izuku said. There couldn't be less of a family resemblance. He let out a puff of fire instead, trying to make his point. Todoroki-kun, when I say I know, I mean that I know. The split-haired boy froze. He looked almost fearful, trembling in the cold. They were surrounded by jagged, fallen structures. The air chilled, but Izuku didn't feel it at all. But I use it anyway, because it is my quirk. I decide what to do with it. He would have never saved anyone with it. He wasn't capable of it. And it's your power. It belongs to you, and only to you. You have a better heart than I do. Todoroki said it like it was a fact, simply. He clenched his fists at his side, and Izuku honestly had no idea what was going to happen next. From the way he spoke, the words themselves sounded like he was just giving up, and it made something in Izuku's chest ache to hear it. But there was just enough of an edge in his tone that kept him believing that Todoroki wasn't done yet. XXXX. There was something in that fierce boy's face that reminded Shudo of his mother, he decided. Even standing there, fingers broken and limp, a ghastly purple. His jaw was clenched, tears at his eyes. He was so determined, a fire shining through. But he was soft, too. Sweet. He was reaching out to him. By picking a fight, maybe. But reaching out, nonetheless. He wanted to laugh and cry at the same time, and his words kept echoing. It's your power. It's not his quirk. It's your quirk. We are not our fathers. He remembered, so long ago, his mother stroking his hair, telling him he didn't have to be a slave to his bloodline. He hadn't really understood it, He'd been so small. He remembered too, sitting on her lap and crying, pressing his face into her chest as she held him. You can be a hero too, Shudo. He was going to do it, he thought. He was going to break the promise and use his power. Because Midoriya was right, wasn't he? It was his power. His father had nothing to do with it. His father wasn't capable of love, not really. And for a long time, Shudo thought he wasn't either, but every word out of Midoriya's mouth reminded him of his mother and how fiercely he had loved her. Even after the pain Endeavor caused him, even after the pain his mother caused him. She had burned him, and he had sobbed for days when she was taken away because he still loved her. I don't think you're here just to surpass your father, Todoroki-kun. A soft voice cut through the air, and he could see Midoriya standing there, chest heaving, head tilted. A small, soft smile on his face. There were flakes of ice falling in the air, peppering his dark, curly hair, and Shudo's breath caught in his throat. You would have left me so many times over at USJ if that was all. So why are you here? Shudo looked down at his trembling hands. And he ignited the right one. He lifted his head to look at a grinning Midoriya as the fire spread along his body, beginning to burn through his uniform. He could feel it on his face, wreathed in flames, but it didn't burn. The crowd started to whoop and go wild. I want to be a hero too, he croaked out, instantly embarrassed by the way his voice cracked. It was a simple desire, one that drove everyone in this program, but it felt nearly impossible to say out loud, like he would be punished for wanting something for himself. But he clenched his fist and took a deep breath and repeated himself with a slight alteration. I will be a hero. Let's go, Todoroki-kun. Midoriya, he shook his head. Sometimes, you take things too far. If only someone had warned me of that before. The green-haired boy said wryly, smiling. You might have one, you know, Shudo said. Midoriya shifted back, raising his left, unbroken arm in a fist, ready to fight, a grin across his face. I don't know, Todoroki-kun. You haven't put a single scratch on me. He could hear a voice, similar to his father, shouting in the background. It sounded almost like praise, but he ignored it. He didn't want to hear a single thing from him, didn't care to hear it. Fuck him right, Midoriya whispered, and Shudo almost broke his composure, hearing the innocent boy in front of him curse. He laughed. And then they collided. They ignored the screams of Midnight and Cementos, blasted straight through the concrete walls Cementos raised at the last second to try and spare them some pain. The cooled air heated up, the dramatic change in pressure creating a force of unimaginable proportions, Shudo putting his all into it, as Midoriya did the same. That incredible pressure, that power that had resided in just a flick of his fingers coming from his entire arm. Those concrete walls never stood a chance. And when the dust settled, Shudo was on his hands and knees, choking on the blood coming from his broken nose. It hurt like a bitch, blood smeared across his face and in his hair. He must have gotten hit with something sharp, because his head was bleeding a little too. His ribs were cracked and broken, chest on fire. He hadn't felt it so much because of the cold, but now that the air temperature had warmed up, he could really feel how hard Midoriya had hit. He looked down to see his hand, a few fingers looking crooked through the cement dust. He tried to shake it off, but when he moved them, it hurt. He didn't even know what he hit them against, not really. He slowly got to his feet, breathing ragged. Once he got over the blood smeared across his face, he could focus a little more, looking out onto the crowd, searching for Midoriya in the dust. He hoped he hadn't really hurt the freckle-faced boy. But if he hadn't given it at all, Midoriya might have beaten his ass. As cute and innocent as he was, another hit like one that had presumably cracked his sternum would have put him down. He finally spotted him, laying against a hunk of ice. Out of bounds. He heard the announcement that he had won, but he hopped over chunks of ice and cement and raced over to Midoriya, ignoring Midnight's yells. He crouched over his classmate, searching his face for signs of consciousness. He kneeled down, ignoring the screaming in his own chest. Midoriya's arm was broken and useless at his side, devastatingly purple. Shudo sucked in a breath and held out his right hand. He heard panicked movement behind him, from Midnight, presumably thinking that Shudo wasn't done with the fight yet, but he ignored them. He carefully encased the arm in ice, straightening it and attaching it to Midoriya's shoulder, using ice sticking out from the makeshift cast and encasing Midoriya's side with it to hold it still. Ugh, Midoriya's eyes fluttered open. That hurt, he muttered, before he really saw Shudo over him. He coughed, and Shudo quickly dodged a small puff of flame. Sorry. Don't apologize, Shudo said, without thinking. Let me help you up. Midoriya slowly sat up, Shudo helping him stand and getting him to his feet. He was careful not to jostle Midoriya's broken arm and tried to avoid his hand as much as possible. Though, Midoriya yelped when it brushed against Shudo's side. I'm sorry, he said quickly. Hey, don't apologize, Midoriya said, almost a sing-songy reiteration of what Shudo had said. You know, you didn't actually do any of this to me. But my father did this to you, he said, gently tapping his upper arm. Midoriya shrugged and turned his face to him, smiling as Shudo shifted his good arm over his shoulders, grabbing Midoriya by the side to help him out. That's because he's a bad person. But you're not like him at all. He was practically beaming at Shudo, and Shudo fought back a blush in his face. Why did you do that? He asked. You sacrificed your body, your win. What? You looked like you were asking for help. Came the simple, honest answer, and Shudo almost broke down and cried right then. Instead, with a feather-light touch, he started to form his ice over Midoriya's hand, holding it in place and hopefully soothing the throbbing pain. Giving him something, anything to concentrate on besides what the green-haired boy just said. He felt Midoriya's curly head bump against his bare chest, where he had lost his shirt. Sorry, came the slurred answer, and as they finally turned around, Shudo could see Samintas and Midnight, standing at the ready, eyes serious, jaws hardened. They relaxed when they saw Shudo was just helping Midoriya off the field, Midnight dropping her stance immediately. She smiled at them. Thought you two boys were still going at it. You looked ready to kill each other out there. Midoriya squeaked next to him. No, we're friends, Midoriya promised. Shudo blinked. We're friends, he said out loud, peering down into deep, green eyes. Midoriya's button nose wrinkled. Yes, of course. When did that happen? Shudo asked, confused. Just now, Midoriya answered decisively. Shudo smiled, a warm, genuine one, eyes crinkling. He wasn't sure the last time he smiled like that. Okay. Oh, Midnight cooed. Adorable. They started shuffling across the field slowly. The tunnel Midoriya would have normally used was cracked and collapsing and also covered in ice. Samintas could have probably gotten Midoriya through safely, but Shudo wanted to carry him out with him. When they got to the center of the field, Shudo paused. Am I really that heavy? He heard the innocent question, and he almost laughed. Instead, he reached up, gingerly taking Midoriya's iced hand that was flung over his right shoulder. Facing the crowd, he raised it to the air with his. The audience went wild. XXXX. Izuku had guessed that Endeavor was going to be waiting for Todoroki, a gleeful look in his eyes as he stepped in their path. Shudo, he said, reaching a hand out towards Todoroki, and Izuku immediately felt Todoroki flinch underneath him. He forced out the largest cough he could, and a jet of flame shot out, hot enough for even Endeavor to take a step back. Sorry, Izuku said, voice raspy. Todoroki-kun is being kind enough to take me to Recovery Girl. He wished he hadn't broken all his bones so he would be more intimidating. Shudo, we will talk later, Endeavor said, a big smile still across his face. I'm glad this tantrum of yours is finally over. You've finally accepted yourself and become a perfect upgrade of me. When you graduate, maybe you'll even be ready to be my sidekick. Izuku was feeling the nausea build with every word, the sick, twisted vision Endeavor had for his son being impressed upon them. He could feel Todoroki stiffening next to him. Endeavor pivoted to look down at Izuku, his smile shrinking. I guess you didn't provide an embarrassing match for him, and he finally used dash. Don't talk to him. Todoroki's voice cut through the air, icy and cold. Izuku felt Todoroki's hand on his side tighten, holding him close. You don't deserve to. Endeavor looked startled. The only reason I used my fire was because for a split second, it wasn't about you. Todoroki hissed. He started moving, walking Izuku past him without looking back. Shudo dash. You really don't have to stay for the rest of the festival, Todoroki said. You saw what you wanted, right? They walked away, backs to Endeavor. Todoroki's head was held high, eyes narrowed, features schooled into a perfect mask. Is it rude to blow a raspberry? Izuku whispered when they were out of the hallway. Todoroki's mask cracked, and he smiled. You're pretty, Izuku said out loud, and Todoroki's eyes widened, head turning to Izuku. Izuku couldn't believe he said that out loud. You don't look like him at all. You must take after your mother, Izuku said, trying to soften what he had just said. Pretty, Todoroki repeated. I'm covered in blood. My nose will probably be crooked. It'll just make you rugged, Izuku insisted, and he watched that mask crack further, the smile growing wider. You're kinda weird, Midoriya. Sorry, he offered. No, I don't mind, Todoroki said. It's nice. You're nice. To me. We're friends, Izuku said firmly. Do you really mean that? There was a tinge of fear in Todoroki's voice, like he was afraid Izuku was going to say no. I do, Izuku promised. I really do. They got Izuku up to Recovery Girl, Todoroki himself needing to take a seat on one of the beds. And oh, Recovery Girl was furious. She spent a good amount of time reaming into Izuku for shattering his bones again, Izuku wincing, but taking it. He cringed a little when she said he needed surgery in his hand, but he supposed this is what he got. It will be crooked for the rest of your life. She berated him. At least one of you had the good sense to splint it. Izuku glanced over at Todoroki, whose head was hung as well. Midoriya, he said. I am so sorry. It's not your fault, Todoroki-kun, Izuku said quickly. I could have tapped out way sooner. I did this to myself. Recovery Girl whacked him on the head with her clipboard. Oh no, I saw the match. What on earth made the two of you think that level of destruction was appropriate for a school sports festival? She pointed at Todoroki. Lay back, she ordered. Your ribs and sternum are cracked. She stared at Izuku as she said it. I'm really sorry, he said. I didn't realize I hit him that hard. Midoriya Izuku, I am more familiar with your quirk than you are, so when I say this, I mean it. She breathed in. Learn to control it better. I should share the blame. I did not anticipate going from cooled to superheated air in a short time span. Todoroki said from his position on the bed, his words sounding like his mouth was filled with blood. If he hadn't hit back as hard as he did, I might have killed him. You two don't know how to stop digging, do you? Recovery Girl asked, hands on her hips. Say whatever you want now, because as soon as you're done, Todoroki will be asleep and you are going in for surgery. She pointed at Izuku, turning to get her materials together. Todoroki reached up and pulled the curtain away, rolling onto his side to look at Izuku. He looked intensely guilty. Don't say it, Izuku said quickly. You didn't do anything I didn't provoke. Besides, this was all me. Todoroki winced. Fine, he said. I won't. He took a deep breath. I'm rooting for you, you know, Izuku told him. Todoroki blinked back. Even if it's Kakin. Why? Because you have a good heart. XXXX. Chio let Toshinori in without a word, just an angry look. He didn't really have a response anymore. Midoriya had woken up and was sitting up in bed groggily, looking at his hand. He could tell Chio had already read the green-haired boy the riot act, from the guilty look on his face and the way he flexed his scarred, crooked hand. All might, he said, his voice wavering. His eyes flicked downward. I'm sorry, he said. For what? Toshinori asked. He knew he had told the boy to make an impression, and even though ultimately his protege had been unable to defeat Todoroki Shudo, Midoriya certainly made one. It had been unbelievable, the destructive force wielded on that field. Toshinori had stood up in his seat, mouth gaping. He had clenched his fists at his side, worried for the small boy, but every time the rubble cleared, he was still standing. Broken, but standing. He couldn't hear what he was saying to the Todoroki boy, but everyone had seen the way it affected him, until the long-awaited flames had been released. Toshinori had a feeling his student had something to do with that. I lost, Midoriya murmured before he peered up at him. Honestly, it didn't matter what fights came next. It barely even mattered who won, even though it was looking like it was going to end up being Bakugo versus Todoroki. There was no way a single fight was going to touch what the stadium had seen. They all knew it. That had been the fight to see. The one that everyone was going to talk about for years to come. The name Midoriya Izuku was famous already. Young Midoriya, Tashinori crouched in front of him. I couldn't care less about whether or not you won that death match. The entire sports festival had been delayed, for crying out loud, because they had to rebuild the arena. Midoriya's face brightened, but Tashinori tapped his hand. What I do care about is that you broke so many bones in the process. He watched the boy wince. Yeah, about that. His voice was a little shaky. Was Todoroki the one you were talking about? Tashinori asked quietly, putting a hand on his shoulder. Midoriya nodded, his legs swinging a little off the bed. Did you help him? Midoriya's expression abruptly changed, beaming up at Tashinori. He never got tired of it. Yes, as much as I could. Then that's all that matters, Tashinori said, gently rubbing his shoulder. That's what you're at UA for, isn't it? XXXX. The final wasn't exactly what Izuku expected. He had seen Todoroki falter, refuse to use his flames at the last second. It had sent Bakugo raging, his victory cheapened. But Izuku figured Todoroki had his reasons, ultimately. Even as they were on the stands, waiting to be presented with their medals, Todoroki looked better. He looked free, like a weight had been lifted from his shoulder. Not once did Izuku see him look out towards the crowd. Bakugo, on the other hand, was muzzled like a dog, having to be restrained to a pole on the platform after refusing to be presented with first place. They had all heard him screaming, "I don't fucking want it," followed by several loud explosions. Izuku figured he had tried to bite Midnight again, because she looked especially smug about Bakugo being muzzled on a platform on national TV. It was horrific, but Izuku had struggled not to laugh. Kaminari was howling. "Didn't you lose?" Jiro asked, as Kaminari rolled around in the grass. "I think everyone here is a winner," he insisted. Everyone except for Bakugo. Bakugo seemed to agree, because he screamed and writhed in his bonds, even as All Might approached, shining his megawatt smile, holding medals in his hands to present to his students. The rattling of the chains was especially disturbing. "Deku," he heard Uraraka whisper. "Were you really childhood friends with him?" Yeah," Izuku admitted. "I know it seems hard to believe." She shivered, pressing a hand to her forehead, before she accepted the reality. "He couldn't have always been like this, huh?" A dash. "Deku." She was almost reprimanding him. "Really, Midoriya?" Sue asked. "He was pretty much always like this," Izuku admitted sheepishly, as they watched All Might present them each with their medals, having to unmuzzle Bakugo for his. He fought and screamed as soon as it was released. Izuku watched his mentor ultimately place it in Bakugo's mouth, before patting him on the head and leaving a seething boy on the first-place stand. He laughed. A few photos were taken, and then the classes were released to go congratulate their classmates. Obviously, camera crews stuck around, waiting to get shots of the competitors celebrating. Present Mike kept on emceeing, but Izuku thought that was actually because he wasn't capable of stopping. Izuku went to Todoroki's stand first, crowding with the other students around it who were waving up at him and congratulating. "Todoroki-kun," he said, waving with his good arm. As soon as Todoroki spotted him, he felt himself move up into the air, and he pinwheeled his arm in surprise, looking down at the pillar of ice that had risen beneath him. Todoroki held out a hand as he took a large step onto the platform, Izuku grinning up at him. Todoroki smiled back, before his face changed. "I'm sorry, I didn't dash." Izuku wordlessly pulled him in for a hug, leaning up on his tiptoes. "I'm proud of you," Izuku breathed out. Bakugo roared on the platform next to them. Izuku smiled to himself, and then squeezed Todoroki tight. "You did it. You should be happy. You should be celebrating," Izuku insisted, and then he slipped his hand lower, bending his knees, and he lifted. "Midoriya." The high-pitched shriek that came out of Todoroki made Izuku laugh, as he lifted Todoroki off the ground. He felt icy cold hands suddenly grip his shoulder as Todoroki almost bent over him, flustered that his feet were leaving the ground. Izuku knew he was pretty small, but really, Todoroki was practically nothing compared to the refrigerators he had dragged. He could probably toss him if he wanted. Izuku heard a wolf whistle and cheers from his classmates. Flying the Canadian flag, he heard someone, probably Kirishima, shout, He figured it would be too much to spin Todoroki around, so he set him down, Todoroki stumbling back. His face was red, hair mussed. His nose was a little crooked now, Izuku realized. But he was still pretty. Izuku laughed. Also, I promise not to do that again. Izuku said, the fight to the death, not the lifting you. I'm definitely going to lift you again. He promised. Todoroki tried to brush his hair out of his face, letting out a huffy breath, before his face cracked into a real smile, no matter how hard he held it back. His nose crinkled as he smiled, a small, real laugh coming out of him. You're too nice to me, he said. Izuku smiled back. I'm going to go track down Shinso and make friends. He said, you should be happy and celebrating. Let them carry you on their shoulders or something. There's no way they're getting near Kakin without losing a hand. Todoroki rubbed the back of his neck. I don't know about that, he said wryly. Izuku turned, seeing Tokoyami on the other platform, and he waved. Tokoyami, he shouted. Congratulations. Tokoyami smiled back, but when Izuku took a step, as if to hop down from the platform and head over, the bird-like boy shook his head and held up his hands. Midoriya, you are an excellent teammate and amazing friend, but please not again. Izuku laughed. Kissing Tokoyami on the beak had totally been worth it. Wait, that reminds me, he said. Of what? He heard Todoroki ask, and he spun around, making eye contact with Todoroki, who had turned to see Tokoyami as well. Izuku leaned up on his tiptoes and kissed him lightly on the right cheek. Todoroki's left side went up in flames instantly. The whoosh of heat was sudden and blisteringly hot, and the crowd went wild for it. Present Mike could barely speak. Even Tokoyami let out a screech. You fucking nerds dash. Sue had climbed up onto the first-place platform at some point, and was in the process of remuzzling Bakugo as his chains rattled, and he tried to jerk his head away like a misbehaved dog. I'm gonna die? Midoriya, I'm gonna die? Oh god, I can't fucking breathe. He heard Kaminari in the crowd, screaming with laughter. The entire class was rolling as Izuku tried to help his friend pat down the flames, unaffected by the heat. Todoroki looked like he was going to pass out. He had a death grip on Izuku's shoulder, and Izuku smothered his laughter as he patted out the last of the flames on Todoroki's side. He had changed into another gym uniform for the final ceremony, only to ruin it again. Oh, I'm so sorry, Todoroki-kun. I didn't mean to do that to you, on national TV dash. He cut himself off, wincing. He had just wanted to do something nice. He didn't mean for Todoroki to catch fire. Todoroki groaned audibly. He waved a hand. Go find Shinso, he said. Izuku looked back hesitantly. I'm okay, Midoriya. Really? His face was still bright red, but he created a set of steps for Midoriya to hustle down, the crowd parting as he did. He was going to smack Kirishima later for the lewd whistles that followed him. He quickly spotted the wild lavender hair through the crowd as they parted around him, and Shinso spotted him coming first, backing up slowly, eyes wide. He held up his hands. I don't need a dash. Izuku broke out into a sprint. Shinso legged it away, kicking up grass behind him, but Izuku was faster, even with his injuries. He tackled him into the grass, the general studies student groaning as they hit the ground. That's the power of friendship right there, folks. Ow. Izuku hugged him with one arm, tightly. Didn't you break all your bones? Not all of them, Izuku said, leaning up and letting Shinso prop himself up on his elbows in the grass. The lavender-haired boy tilted his head at him, raising an eyebrow in disbelief as Izuku stuck out his phone. What? Put your number in, he insisted. Why? Because we're going to be friends, Izuku insisted, and I'm going to help you train to transfer into my class. Shinso stared at him. You? He asked incredulously. Shinso, I could throw you over my head like a roll of paper towels without my quirk. Shinso quickly typed his number into Izuku's phone. Why are you like this? He asked, pulling himself up to a sitting position. You're crazy. Izuku smiled at him. I think you're pretty cool. And you made it this far in the competition, I can tell you want it. And I know what it's like to want it so bad, and have everyone tell you that you just can't. He gestured at himself. But I got lucky, and I have someone in my corner. And now I'm here. So, Shinso crossed his arms over his chest, eyebrows still raised. He seemed like he was trying to get a read on Izuku. Who would I be if I forgot about all the people who got me here? Izuku said. And if I didn't try and do the same for someone else who deserves it? Shinso rubbed his face. You know, I actually think you're genuine. Izuku beamed at him and leaned in for another hug. Shinso planted a hand against his chest. Do not kiss me. When Izuku looked back, he could see Todoroki on Kirishima's shoulders, looking terrified, having been forcibly removed from the platform. His classmates were cheering for him, chanting and dragging him around. Though Kirishima had hardened his neck so that the death grip from Todoroki's thighs didn't knock him out, the teen's hands were gripping Kirishima's wild red hair like claws. Mismatched eyes were wide, unsure of what to do. But for a split second, when Kirishima patted his legs and insisted, I've got you, I see hot, he even looked happy. Chapter 7. Learning what had happened to Ida's brother through the news had pulled the air out of Izuku's lungs. He had gotten dizzy, reading about the hero killer's attack, having to sit down on the couch heavily while he absorbed it. Izuku, he heard his mother ask, noticing the abrupt change in her son. Is something wrong? He didn't even know how to address that. It somehow hurt more that Ida hadn't said anything about it first, Izuku realized over the past few days. Like he didn't trust them, or he couldn't talk to them about it. Izuku pushed quiet feelings of rejection away. After all, it was not his brother. He couldn't judge his friend for the way he was dealing with this. It wasn't his place to do so. But it still hurt to watch. His friend was normally so chipper and composed, and the first day back at school it was like all that had drained away. The facade was still there, but it lacked the spark behind it. Izuku didn't know if it was the right way to deal with it, if he was crowding his friend. But he did the only thing he was capable of, and he crushed Ida in a hug against him. He could hear him start to protest, insisting nothing was wrong, going tense under Izuku's grip. But Izuku wrapped his arms around his neck, rubbed Ida's back, and hooked his chin over his shoulder in the tightest, most empathetic hug he was capable of, a long one where he wouldn't let go until Ida was ready. Ida went slack against him, and it was only seconds later, when he realized Izuku wasn't letting go, that he wrapped his arms around him and hugged him back. He felt a face press against his neck, and if there was a quiet noise of anguish that escaped his friend, he would never tell. When they finally parted, Ida's eyes looked red and his eyes darted away, but Izuku put his hand on his arm and told him with all the earnestness he could muster that he was there for Ida. But when Izuku saw Ida, he knew it wasn't enough. Things were different after the sports festival, at least for a time. Ida was more subdued. Uraraka had a fire lit under her, but Kugo's competitive nature was reaching a boiling point, and Todoroki. It didn't escape Izuku that when the split-haired boy walked into class, briefly catching his eye, his cool expression had softened. The tight line of his mouth seemed to turn up a little at the ends. It was subtle, almost more of a grimace than anything else, but it hit Izuku out of the blue. Todoroki was trying to smile. Izuku took too long to respond, though, and he watched the expression start to slide off his face. Todoroki-kun. Izuku burst out, maybe with too much enthusiasm. Todoroki looked startled. Good morning. Several members of the class looked over, attention drawn by Izuku's outburst. Good morning, Midoriya. The teen finally answered, slowly. His expression had softened again. Not quite a smile, but getting there. How is your hand? He asked, and Izuku was having a hard time reading the tone in his voice. Regardless, Izuku stuck his scarred hand up into the air. Todoroki winced, visibly. Izuku flexed it, grinning back. It's good as new, Todoroki-kun. Izuku insisted. Maybe that wasn't quite true. It was a little crooked, a little stiff. It was mostly cosmetic. Recovery Girl had said that with some physical therapy and hand exercises, it would loosen up as long as he was diligent and avoided injuring it again soon. She had said the last part with not even a shred of faith in him. I doubt that. But I'm glad to hear you are doing better, Todoroki said, almost solemnly. With a dip of his head, he took his seat in the back, signifying the conversation was over. Kirishima leaned over Shiro, eyes sparkling mischievously as he caught Izuku's attention. Thawing the ice, Prince, huh? Izuku threw his pencil at Kirishima, who hardened his forehead so it bounced off uselessly. He let out a barking laugh. When Aizawa walked in, the inane chatter came to an end quickly. He took his spot at the front of the room, looking out on the class and pinching the bridge of his nose. The bandages had been removed, and despite the sudden rush of congratulations and questions about his condition, he silenced them with a glare. As you may all know, I was providing commentary and analysis for the sports festival, he said, looking out at the group. They tittered nervously in their seats. Izuku could still remember walking in with his busted arm, forehead, and ribs and Aizawa's scathing commentary about USJ. He winced at the memory. Pretty cool, huh? Kirishima said, pushing out his chest proudly. I watched you and a student with identical quirks knock each other out. Aizawa responded flatly. If I wanted to see two fools crack their heads together and end up unconscious, I could just watch Kaminari and Ishido during gym. Hey, the blonde cried. Watching all of you clowns gave me a headache. Aizawa snapped. Izuku sunk down in his chair as the unkempt man's piercing gaze ran over the class, ultimately ending on him anyways. Midoriya. Yes, sensei. Izuku choked out. You know that this is a school event, and if you are too injured to continue, you can say so at any time, correct? Izuku nodded timidly. I need a verbal answer, Midoriya, so I can ensure that I did indeed lay out the rules appropriately, and your skull just happens to be made of granite. Yes, Aizawa-sensei. I knew I could forfeit, he says, staring at his desk, bright red. His cheeks felt hot. Todoroki. Izuku raised his head to see Aizawa pinning the split-haired teen to his seat with his glare. He briefly made eye contact with the other boy, who averted his eyes quickly. Aizawa hadn't even said anything yet, and Todoroki looked equally chastened, knowing what was about to come. Izuku wanted to protest, to confess that he had pushed Todoroki so hard on purpose and baited him into the fight. But he figured Aizawa would not appreciate the sentiment. Were you aware that Midoriya's quirk means he is highly resistant to extreme temperatures? Todoroki's eyes widened. No, he admitted. Then I would like to impress upon you the fact that if it had been anyone besides Midoriya caught in an explosion that blew a concrete stadium apart Aizawa sounded like he was grinding his teeth. The potential magnitude of the force you utilized. Do you understand? Yes, sensei. Todoroki's expression was largely unreadable, except for the wide eyes that looked shell-shocked. It won't happen again. See to it. Aizawa leaned back, bracing his hands against the podium and sighing. While I saw advancements in many of your performances, the best technical performance I saw was Bakugo's. I don't want to hear it. Aizawa silenced the blonde with a sharp look. And yet, despite winning, had to be restrained on the podium. He crossed his arms over his chest. While there are individual victories that should be celebrated, I don't want any of you to think that there aren't necessary improvements to be made. He said, all of these will be addressed. But as for the rest of today, we have a different task ahead of us. Training, studying, pop quiz. Came the nervous suggestions. Hero names, Aizawa said. XXXX. Shudo wanted to sink down and die. He knew that Aizawa was going to call them out. His match with Midoriya had been so rife with violence and injury that their teacher had to. The magnitude of the power shown in the stadium that day necessitated addressing, even shaming. He hadn't realized that Midoriya was resistant to high temperatures, and he had felt almost nauseous at the thought of what could have happened to anyone else. He glanced over at the green-haired boy who was writing on the board and erasing it periodically, obviously deep in thought over his choice of hero name. He couldn't stomach the thought of the short, sunny boy being burnt and broken. Even seeing him laying limply against the ice had sent a spike of fear through Shudo's heart, far too reminiscent of Midoriya's condition at USJ. Shudo hadn't known what it was like to care about a friend before. But that's what it was, right? He hadn't known it, but it was unmistakable. The rush of fear at seeing his friend injured. The idea of damage being done to him. Shudo hadn't pinpointed exactly when he had officially put his classmate so near to his heart. Sometime in between watching him crack his broken knuckles in the arena and a bone-crushing hug that forced his feet off the ground, and watching Midoriya tackle his former opponent to the ground with unbridled optimism. Maybe when he told him he was proud of him, even though Shudo was wearing the second-place medal and not the first. His father would have ripped it off of him and told him that second place wasn't good enough, that he had thrown away first, and any contentment with his current position was failure. Maybe then, Shudo decided. Though if it hadn't been then, it probably would have been the kiss on the cheek that sent a rush of heat to his face, so violent he had quite literally burst into flames. He wanted to bang his head into his desk at the thought. He wasn't active on social media in any form, but he had caught glimpses on his classmates' phones, and the press had gone absolutely wild over his fiery debut in the public eye. It was just that Shudo hadn't had someone touch him so tenderly in years. The last time he had been kissed was by his mother, and the last memory he had of her was her disfiguring him permanently with boiling water. So that had gone so well, obviously. It was so soft and sweet and sudden dash. And Midoriya was cute, and it made it so much worse. Shudo tried not to think about it too much, but he certainly had thoughts about being this disfigured, ugly freak. Scarred. Mismatched. He tried not to let it affect him too much. After all, personal relationships had always been impressed upon him to be weaknesses. It didn't matter if he wasn't attractive. He didn't need to be a hero. It didn't matter, right? And then the soft, sweet, absolutely jacked boy had called him pretty and kissed him on the cheek, and had reached a hand out to him when he had needed it most. Shudo let out a sharp breath and pinched the skin on his arm. His face was feeling hot again, and if he went up in flames in the middle of class, he would die on the spot of embarrassment. It felt stupid to even consider. Midoriya had done so much for him, protecting him from his father, fighting tooth and nail to get through to Shudo, forcing him to look at the truth and take a step closer to accepting himself instead of fighting it. The least of what he had done had anything to do with Shudo's looks, and he felt dumb for even thinking about something so trivial. But for a moment, Shudo had entertained the thought that someone so cute thought he was pretty, and he had held his face into his pillow and tried to get a hold of his stupid self without lighting on fire again. Fuyumi had even teased him. His mother hadn't said anything about the sports festival yet since he began to talk to her again. After all, there was so much else to catch up on. But he didn't miss the faint smile when she asked how he liked his new classmates. He was pulled out of his thoughts by Midoriya putting his board down on the podium without hesitation, jaw hardened. He jerked in his seat at what was written. Midoriya-kun, Uraraka whispered. Are you sure? A ripple of unease went through the class. They all knew what the word meant. Useless. An insult from a childhood bully that had followed Midoriya to high school. Shudo almost snapped his pencil in his hand. Midoriya nodded firmly. For a long time, this meant something negative. Something bad. Midoriya admitted, running a hand through his curly, tangled hair. But it means what I want it to mean. And it reminds me of my time here, with all of you, and everything to come that I look forward to. It inspires me to be better, and I wanted to do the same for everyone who hears it, one day. Deku. Written in bold letters across the board, and not a single ounce of hesitation on Midoriya's face. Shudo could swear he saw Aizawa crack an eye open from his sleeping bag in the corner of the room. Midnight cheered and approved Midoriya's name nonetheless, sending him back to his seat for the next person. Shudo swallowed as he caught another glimpse of Midoriya's board, the moment of confidence in those green eyes. I don't deserve him. None of us do. XXXX. Izuku needed to talk to Todoroki privately, he realized. But it was hard to find the time, really. Todoroki hadn't sat with them at lunch, though Izuku had already mentally made a to-do list that involved harassing the teen until he did. After all, it wasn't like Todoroki looked sad when he sat at lunch with a book and ate quietly alone. But Izuku knew how unbearably lonely it could get, and for the first time in his life he had friends, and by God, he was going to share them. Hey, what's this? Kaminari said, bending down near the wall in the locker room. They were all in various states of undress as they changed, Kaminari still shirtless. The blonde could get distracted easily, though, and the moment he spied whatever he was currently examining, he had dropped his shirt on the bench and walked over. Izuku stepped out, frowning. Most of the boys were trying to figure out what exactly Kaminari was looking at. What is it? Siro asked. It looks like a hole, but like it's been purposely drilled. Kaminari squinted against it. And then he jerked away, letting out a shriek of shock and discharging some static that traveled along the lockers and had Kirishima swearing as he jumped away from the metal. Kaminari-kun. Izuku tilted his head as he walked forward. Are you okay? Kaminari was on the ground, his face bright red, stammering. Nothing, he responded. I don't think that was his question, bro. Zero said, snorting. If you aren't going to tell us, I'm going to take a look. You can't. Kaminari shrieked. He covered his face with his hands. I know I should be enjoying this, but I feel so guilty, even though it was an accident dash. Bro, your muttering could rival Midoriya's, Kirishima said. I fucking doubt that. Bakugo snapped from the back. Spit it out, electric weasel. We're all waiting with fucking bated breath for your goddamn brilliant reveal. Izuku had a deep, dark confession that he would never ever say out loud to anyone. Sometimes, the mean things Bakugo said were funny and Izuku had to fight the urge to laugh. Sometimes, he thought about Bakugo calling Shigaraki a freaky one-armed bastard with fat fucking fingers, and he couldn't control his wheezing. He felt so bad about it, because after all, no one really deserved Bakugo's ire, and the comments directed at their classmates were unkind, and Izuku would never condone that. Most of the time, it didn't get to him. But once in a blue moon, when it hit just right, Izuku had to excuse himself, or he would choke on his own spit. Spark plug. We don't have all day. Bakugo barked. It's the girls' locker room, Kaminari said with horror. Oh, Izuku squeaked out. Ida started to sputter uncontrollably, hands making wild, chopping motions. Mineta probably drilled a hole in the wall before he left. A pervy calling card, if you will. Zero suggested. A gift for the generations. He joked, but we should probably cover it. Jiro is going to kill me. Kaminari. Izuku couldn't help his disapproving tone. It was an accident, he wailed. I didn't know what I was looking at. Zero held out his arm and shot off a piece of tape towards the hole in the wall, covering it. Kirishima walked over and flattened it, smoothing it out for good measure. He glanced at Kaminari, who was bright red and wailing on the ground. I won't tell if you don't tell. Kirishima offered. It was an accident, after all. Right? Ida demanded, looking at Kaminari pointedly. Though, with the way he was crying, Izuku didn't think for a second that Kaminari had meant any harm. It was, he cried. I feel so guilty. You know, you acted like such a perv when Mineta was around, but have you ever seen a girl naked? Zero asked quizzically, clearly already knowing the answer to his question. Guys, stop. Zero laughed. He offered a hand out to Kaminari, helping him up from the ground. Like any of you have seen a girl naked. Most of the boys shrugged nonchalantly, admitting so. Ojiro looked briefly guilty, and Kirishima zeroed in on him instantly. Ojiro, I see that flush. Ojiro averted his eyes. I just spend all my time at the dojo, and some of the girls there don't really care about closing doors when they change. Ojiro admitted with a shrug. It's just kind of weird. They're like my sisters. Shoji nodded behind him. My family is pretty body positive, he said, lifting several of his arms with a nonchalant tone. I walked in on my sister and her friends showing each other their mutation-type quirks, once. The worst part was when they started drilling me on mine. Izuku flushed next to him, letting out a small squeak. Shoji turned immediately. Oh, not like that, Midoriya. I mean, they wanted to know what other body parts one could make multiples of. It was uncomfortable. Oh God. Izuku slapped a hand over his mouth, understanding immediately what the taller boy was saying. Don't know why fucking Deku is acting all sweet and innocent. Everyone's head snapped towards him immediately. Kakin. Izuku squeaked. In the 6th grade, these fucking idiot girls wanted to tease him, and they grabbed him and pulled him into the bathroom with them and started getting changed to see what he would do. Bakugo said, ignoring Izuku. Izuku wanted to lay down and die. He could feel everyone's eyes boring into him. Idiot was too dumb to understand, and he ran out with a red face and fell down the stairs and busted his nose. Izuku covered his face with his hands. A body slammed into him from the side, hard enough to almost knock him over, and Kirishima rubbed his knuckles into his head, howling with laughter. Ah, Midoriya, you're too good. It was inappropriate. He yelled between his fingers, wincing under the strength of Kirishima's noogie. He remembered the incident vividly. He knew after the fact that they were making fun of him. It was a group of older girls, and he had been so shy and quiet for his age. They were generally friendly to him, in the way one might play around with a small animal. He was a novelty, quirkless and shy and rambling, and absolutely nothing about him was threatening. It was cruel, though, and he knew later that it was. But in the moment, he had just been so flustered that he ran out of the bathroom while they laughed. Midoriya-kun was acting in an appropriate manner, and I am glad to hear so. Ida said, chopping vigorously. I would expect nothing less from his upstanding moral character. Can we please change the subject? Izuku begged. A ripple of laughter ran through the room as they finished getting changed, boys starting to head upstairs. When there were only a few people left, Todoroki being one of them, Izuku decided to try and talk to him. He sat down on a bench near the split-haired boy, tying his shoe. Hey, Todoroki-kun, he said, as Todoroki adjusted the sleeve of his gym uniform that had rolled up awkwardly. His classmate glanced over at him. Yes. Can we talk for a minute? Izuku asked quietly, tracking the last person, Kaminari, out of the corner of his eye. He was heading up the stairs, oblivious to their conversation. I suppose so, Todoroki said, shutting his locker and turning to Izuku expectantly. There wasn't really an easy way to approach this topic, but Izuku understood more than most that it needed to be done. I wanted to talk to you about your dad. A mask immediately fell over Todoroki's face. I don't think there is anything else to say, he said coldly. Todoroki-kun, I know you probably don't want to hear this, but I'm worried. About you. That you're not safe at home. Izuku confessed. And I know how hard it is to ask for help, especially when you still have family that he can hurt, even if it's not you. Todoroki jerked back as if he'd been burned. Izuku didn't know Todoroki's exact situation, but there was something about violent fathers with fire quirks, he supposed. But whatever he's doing, he's not going to stop. Have you been spying on me? Todoroki was uneasy. Izuku tilted his head, confused. He shook it. No, I just know my father wouldn't have stopped until he killed me or my mom. Todoroki closed his eyes. So, when you say you understand dash, Todoroki cut himself off, jerking his head away. I understand. Izuku said seriously. Quirks can be repressed, you know, because of trauma. Emotional. Physical. He tapped the side of his skull. Head. He had suspicions that he had brought up with his counselor. Not that it mattered. What the specific event was that had caused him to repress his quirk was. It had happened. It was done. But he remembered one argument. Right around his 4th birthday. Seeing Hisashi grab his mother's arm and knowing immediately what was to come. Of balling up his little fists and pushing on his father's leg, trying to help his mom, and Hisashi shoving him so hard, he went careening into the counter and cutting his head open. He remembered bleeding all over the floor, dizzy and hot and confused, and his mother's sobbing, concerned face swimming into view above him. Something about that night felt pivotal to him, in a way that was hard to put his finger on. His counselor had told him that ultimately, the repression of his quirk was a psychological response. If he felt it was pivotal, even at the time, it probably was. She didn't brush him off or tell him it didn't matter, but talked to him about it seriously. What did happen? Todoroki asked quietly. To him. He was arrested. Izuku said honestly. For dash comma? Izuku shook his head. No, he killed 6 people. Izuku said, and Todoroki stilled even further, if that was possible. He wasn't a villain, really. If that's what you're wondering. He was angry. And a bad person. But my mom never told anyone, and he never would have stopped otherwise. Izuku stretched his legs out. He's the number 2 hero. Todoroki said numbly. I don't think anyone would believe me. Aizawa would. Izuku said. When all this started happening, he gestured at his throat. He knew that it had something to do with trauma, and he suspected my mom. He came to me and offered me quirk counseling and therapy through the school, completely confidential, and I think he started building a case about me. In case it was her, so he would have everything needed to take legal action. Izuku said, trying to get all the facts out before Todoroki could shoot him down. And I mean, he didn't need to after all. But he kept it under wraps, even from me. If you tell him something, he'll keep it a secret. He won't do anything that will get you hurt. There's nothing he can do, Todoroki said bitterly. I don't know about that, Izuku said. Plus, the school has Principal Nedzu on their side. I think he could take Endeavor any day. Izuku didn't think now was the appropriate time to launch into the explanation of hero matchups he had considered before. Endeavor was brawny and fiery, but he had no doubt Nezu's superior intellect would demolish the devastatingly predictable hero any day. He had never hated Endeavor before learning the truth, but he lacked the same spark that had driven All Might to number one. Todoroki wavered at the thought, seemingly having forgotten about their high-spec principle. I'm not saying everything will go right away to being all right, but they can help. They can try and protect you. Izuku rubbed his head. You have older siblings, right? Maybe they could help them try and get custody of you, or get you and your mom financially independent from him. Or they could add extra training for when you don't want to be at home with him. Midoriya. Todoroki's voice cut through his rambling. Izuku's head jerked up. Todoroki seemed deep in his own thoughts. I'll think about it, okay? And Izuku believed him. And I know you might not feel totally comfortable with me yet, and that's okay, but I also thought if you ever just wanted to talk about it, I'm not exactly a qualified therapist, but I could listen, or if you needed help with injuries, I got pretty good at first aid. Midoriya. Sorry. Izuku apologized for rambling, rubbing his neck sheepishly. He offered the split-haired teen a small smile. I ramble. No, don't apologize. Todoroki said. I might he paused. I might take you up on it. Oh, Izuku blinked. Good. He gave him the sunniest smile he could manage. If he wasn't sure it was just the odd lighting in the locker room, he would swear Todoroki was blushing. Even so, the split-haired boy definitely averted his eyes. We should go, Todoroki said, jerking his head towards the door. We're going to be late. Oh yeah,